The 9,852nd meeting of the Security Council is resumed. I now give the floor to the representative of Spain.
Gracias, señor presidente,
you,
por convocar esta reunión sobre UNRWA en un momento tan crítico para la agencia. Gracias, señor Lazzarini, por dirigirse al Consejo. En nombre de Bélgica, Irlanda, Luxemburgo, Malta, Noruega, Eslovenia y España, me gustaría expresarle todo nuestro apoyo a usted y a UNRWA y reconocer su trabajo esencial en toda la región, especialmente en el territorio palestino ocupado. Deseo rendir un homenaje especial al personal de UNRWA en Gaza por su trabajo y sacrificio en la prestación de asistencia y protección a la población civil. Deploramos profundamente la aprobación del 28 de octubre por la Knesset israelí de la legislación destinada a abolir las actividades de UNRWA en el territorio palestino ocupado. Si se aplica, la legislación tiene como objetivo suspender las operaciones de UNRWA en Cisjordania, incluyendo Jerusalén Este, y obstaculizando las operaciones vitales de UNRWA en Gaza. También estamos profundamente preocupados por la notificación a UNRWA para que cese sus operaciones y evacúe sus instalaciones en Jerusalén antes del 30 de enero. Condenamos la retirada de Israel del acuerdo 1967 entre Israel y UNRWA, de 1967 entre Israel y UNRWA, así como cualquier intento de obstruir su capacidad para operar y llevar a cabo su mandato derivado a la Asamblea General, extendido sistemáticamente desde el establecimiento de UNRWA en 1949. Exigimos la suspensión de la entrada en vigor de dichas leyes en cumplimiento del derecho internacional, la Carta de la ONU y las medidas provisionales exigidas por la Corte Internacional de Justicia. Instamos al gobierno israelí a cumplir con sus obligaciones internacionales y a mantener su responsabilidad de permitir y facilitar una asistencia humanitaria completa, rápida, segura y sin trabas en todo el territorio palestino
humanitarian assistance throughout the OPT and in particular in Gaza. We support UNRWA as part of our humanitarian commitment and born of our staunch defense of and respect for international law, including IHL. UNRWA stands as more essential than ever. It is the very backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza and is vital in terms of implementing the ceasefire, a ceasefire which will allow the much-needed scale-up of humanitarian relief for thousands of Palestine refugees and civilians. UNRWA provides life-saving support through humanitarian assistance. However, it also ensures the delivery of essential basic services. These include education and healthcare. These services provide dignity and hope for millions of Palestine refugees across the region. These services will be crucial in the reconstruction and stabilization phase. We reiterate our unwavering commitment to a just, comprehensive and lasting peace based on the two-state solution. We will actively support and engage with international partners to produce concrete, irreversible steps towards the two-state solution by reviving a political process to this end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Spain for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Cabo Verde.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the Community of Portuguese-Speaking Countries, CPLP, Angola, Brazil, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Mozambique, Portugal, São Tomé and Príncipe, Timor-Leste, and my own country, Cabo Verde. We would like to thank the Algerian presidency for convening this timely and important briefing. We express deep concern about the implementation of the legislation adopted by the Israeli parliament that threatens to severely hinder UNRWA operations in the occupied Palestinian territory that will take place at any moment. The CPLP expresses its staunch support of UNRWA and its mandate established more than 75 years ago by the General Assembly to alleviate the unresolved question of Palestinian refugees. Its mandate is legal, valid, and continues to be critical to provide Palestinians with essential human services, such as health and education. We express our deep concern over the fate of millions of refugees in the occupied Palestinian territory. Those living in the Gaza Strip have virtually nothing left beyond the agency's capacity to provide humanitarian aid. The Palestinians in the West Bank have been enduring settlement expansion, intimidation, arbitrary violence and detention, and demolitions of property, among other ordeals. In this context, we underline the widespread consensus that UNRWA is indispensable and irreplaceable to assist the Palestinian refugees, particularly when they need it most. Banning UNRWA for operating in the OPT would entail tragic consequences and cancel the hope of hundreds of thousands of children to access education after 15 months of relentless bombing in the Gaza Strip. It would exacerbate tensions in an already unstable political environment and hamper furthermore the possibility of reaching a diplomatic solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We therefore reiterate our appeal to Israel to freeze the implementation of such laws, including in East Jerusalem, and allow the movement of UNRWA's local staff in the OPT. Continue deconfliction of UNRWA installations in Gaza and the West Bank. Allow UNRWA to continue importing aid assistance into the West Bank and Gaza. We urge all parties to resume a political dialogue in view to implement the two-state solution. The CPLP supports the ceasefire in Gaza, and we expect it can hold permanently. It is due time to go back to the path of diplomacy and seek political solutions for the underlying causes of the conflict. Mr. President, the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries calls for the Security Council to act on this matter and to protect UNRWA, keeping its privileges and immunities. UNRWA's fate must be intertwined with the final political solution for the Palestinian question, in line with the relevant resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Cabo Verde for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Iceland.
Mr. President, thank you for calling this meeting on UNRWA, an issue of urgency and importance. And let me also thank Mr. Lazzarini and Mr. Egeland for their inputs this morning. The long-awaited ceasefire in Gaza is an opportunity. In the short term, to bring urgent humanitarian aid. In the longer term, to help Palestinians rebuild their lives after nearly a year and a half of a devastating war. Gaza has been left in ruins. Most homes and businesses are destroyed. Groundwater is seriously polluted. Schools have been turned into emergency shelters and hospitals flattened. Reconstruction will be a mammoth task. We, the international community, have failed the people of Gaza for over a year, especially the children of Gaza. Those who have survived are losing the second school year in a row. We must not fail them again. We welcome the rapid engagement by OCHA, as well as the swift deployment of aid with more than 5,160 trucks carrying aid in the first 8 days after the ceasefire. Some Gazan families can now finally have full rations and 3 meals a day, as opposed to 1 bag of flour for the entire month. This is great improvement, but the humanitarian situation remains precarious. The war has left 2 million people homeless, without an income and fully dependent on food assistance. Several other UN agencies, including UNICEF, UNOPS, and UNDP, are operating and laying out impressive strategies for further assistance and the rebuilding of Gaza. However, these key UN agencies and programs work hand in glove with UNRWA. UNRWA's know-how, capabilities, and experience is unmatched. So is the level of trust the agency enjoys with Palestine refugees. No other agency can navigate the field as they can, and therefore UNRWA is a vital partner for any agency which wishes to have an impact. Under these circumstances, a total halt to the operations of UNRWA, the most centrally placed humanitarian organization responding to the needs of Palestine refugees in the Middle East, will have devastating consequences. Israel must allow UNRWA to operate in the humanitarian space and secure its involvement in a transitional process. Israel, as the occupying power, has a legal obligation to ensure the well-being of civilians in the territory. This includes securing the continuation of education, health, and other services beyond the end of this month, when the law takes effect. Iceland has repeatedly voiced its concerns over the Israeli legislation against UNRWA and consistently called for respect of international humanitarian law. At the center of our concern is the well-being of the population in Gaza. All parties involved, including the Israeli authorities, must take a pragmatic approach in order to ensure the provision of urgent humanitarian aid and the rebuilding of infrastructure and communities for the long term. This includes allowing unrestricted movement of UNRWA staff, maintaining the deconfliction of UNRWA installations, and allowing the continued access of aid that UNRWA has been distributing in the West Bank and Gaza. The unilateral action against UNRWA also threatens to undermine any prospect of a two-state solution. The organization has delivered essential services and humanitarian aid under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The end of its mandate should be a part of a negotiated settlement between the people of Israel and Palestine. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Iceland for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
À l'entame de mon propos, Monsieur le Président, je voudrais vous féliciter pour le leadership avec lequel vous conduisez cette présidence algérienne du Conseil de sécurité. Je voudrais également vous remercier d'avoir convoqué cette réunion sur la situation au Moyen-Orient, y compris la question de Palestine, avec un focus sur les moments troubles que vit l'Office de secours et de travaux des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés Palestine dans le profond croyant UNRWA.
Is currently experiencing. This is also a good opportunity to pay tribute to Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General, and his devoted team that make extreme sacrifices to protect innocent lives. Ms. Lazzarini, you gave an enlightening briefing in many regards on the uncertain future facing the agency and the growing threat of the unprecedented human tragedy that Gaza is likely to see if the mandate of the agency is indeed prevented. This plea was in favor of necessary support that we owe UNRWA. Mr. President, we really do not need to reiterate how important UNRWA is in terms of providing a whole range of services on healthcare, education, food, shelter, inter alia to Palestinians. At the same time, whilst my delegation commends rightly the ceasefire agreement and the resumption of the provision of humanitarian assistance, it is still the case that the humanitarian disaster is still raging in Gaza because of unilateral measures, including attacks against civilians that have been taken by the Israeli authorities. This deplorable situation is extremely worrisome and undermines a vital agreement for Gazan civilians that has been the fruit of several months of diplomatic efforts. So the Security Council mustn't fall into the trap of non-documented allegations of a lack of neutrality that barely hide the desire to continue broadly condemned illegal practices that have been broadly condemned by the international community that is committed to peace and justice. It is more urgent than ever that the Security Council shoulders its responsibility in order to ensure scrupulous compliance with the ceasefire and also to call upon Israel to respect IHL and to cease all unilateral measures that seek to prevent the implementation of UNRWA's mandate. This is both a legal obligation and a moral duty to prevent a dangerous precedent from being set that might undermine all UN agencies and missions throughout the world.
Nulle part ailleurs, les Nations Unies n'auront la garantie de pouvoir exécuter leur mandat. nécessaire surtout de retirer aux populations palestiniennes à Jérusalem et en Cisjordanie l'aide humanitaire au moment où elles en ont le plus besoin et annihiler plus de 75 années de sacrifices et d'œuvres communes pour le compte de l'humanitaire. Le soutien politique unanime de tous les États membres ainsi que les contributions volontaires au budget de l'Office font une adhésion de la communauté internationale à la poursuite du mandat de l'UNRWA qui nourrit les espoirs de paix et de reconstruction pour ces populations qui ont tout enduré et tout perdu. Pour conclure, ma délégation exige la mise en œuvre des mesures conservatoires édictées par la Cour internationale de justice dans ses différentes décisions et appelle la communauté internationale à s'investir pour un cessez-le-feu permanent et à défendre l'UNRWA pour mieux protéger les droits inaliénables du peuple palestinien. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Senegal for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The 9,853rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Angola, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Guatemala, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Uruguay, and Zimbabwe to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Viviane van de Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and operations of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Viviane van de Peer.
Yeah, it's on and the mic is on. Can you hear them?
Yes.
You have the floor, madam.
We're having some difficulties here, but I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council.
Hi, MONUSCO, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes. It's a little low, but I can hear you. Can we zoom in the camera?
Zoom in the camera.
Zoom in the camera.
Leta kompyuta yote mbele.
More.
Leta kompyuta yote mbele. Yeah. Tena.
More. I cannot hear the sound.
Sound.
No sound.
Sound minute.
Yeah, leave the camera there. Okay. Okay, he's moving right now. Yes, the acting force commander and the yes. She cannot hear.
I cannot hear them. The president is talking to me.
Okay, you're welcome. Anasema na mwenye chini mwenye kwa kamera atoke. Amesema mwenye anaonekana kwa kamera atoke. So adjust hizi tutoke sisi wote. Hata na kamera ikae tu venye ilikuwa. Amesema kamera iko sawa.
Cannot hear the president. Speak.
Hi, MONUSCO, they're waiting for you to speak.
Thank you, President. We apologize deeply for these technical difficulties. Can you hear me?
You have the floor, madam.
Thank you. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Madam Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda, and other distinguished ambassadors and representatives. Thank you for convening an emergency meeting of the Security Council to follow up on the situation in Goma. Allow me to share with you our understanding of the current situation and the implications for MONUSCO. The escalating clashes in eastern DRC have resulted in massive displacement. More than 178,000 people fled Kalehe territory when the M23 took over Minova, with more than 34,000 of them seeking refuge in already overcrowded existing IDP sites in and around Goma. This surge has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation and also a protection situation, overwhelming Goma's infrastructure and compounding challenges related to water, electricity, and medical services. Despite the deliberations and the appeal by member states at the Emergency Security Council meeting on 26 January, The M23 RDF launched an attack on Goma using heavy direct and indirect fire within hours after the conclusion of the Security Council meeting. These attacks continue to ravage the city, killing, injuring, traumatizing, and displacing civilians and exacerbating the crisis. In accordance with its obligations under international humanitarian law, during the last few days, MONUSCO has received a large number of people seeking refuge, including officials and various elements who have surrendered their arms, which underscores once again the critical role of peacekeeping in such a volatile environment. The mission's human rights component also continues to receive requests for individual protection measures from human rights defenders and civil society organizations, and is working internally and with external partners to ensure their safety. However, MONUSCO's bases are not able to accommodate the large number of surrendering elements and civilians seeking refuge. Moreover, our bases are not safe themselves. 2 mortars fell in MONUSCO bases and compounds in the last 3 days, as well as countless bullets. Installations of former police unit staff in Jambar camp have been destroyed and burned. MONUSCO is storing voluntarily relinquished or abandoned weapons in accordance with international standards. MONUSCO is taking concrete steps to secure these weapons surrendered by various fighting elements to avoid any possible scenario where the mission could be put under pressure to hand over those weapons to any group. Casualty evacuation efforts remain a significant challenge. During the fighting in Sake, which began 4 days ago, peacekeepers were seriously injured. We continue to do our utmost to ensure timely evacuation of injured peacekeepers and other casualties to a level 3 hospital in Goma, despite continuing challenges. The fighting of the past week has also severely hampered supply convoys and consumed many resources held by MONUSCO's units. Damage to camps, including water tanks, generators, and vehicles, has further exacerbated the situation. Many troops are now running out of critical equipment, especially water, food, medical supplies, and blood. In some camps, fuel shortages have rendered generators inoperable, affecting communications equipment. In addition, a significant number of non-combatants have sought refuge in MONUSCO's camps in need of food, water, and medical care, further straining already limited supplies. The MONUSCO warehouse at the airport has been looted, further depleting supplies. The courthouse in Goma has been looted, and I can continue with this list. The proliferation of weapons in Goma poses a significant risk as combatants blend into the civilian population and abandoned military depots are looted by civilians. The mass influx of internally displaced persons without shelter, the separation of families, the proliferation of armed elements, and the escape of prisoners following a breakout from Goma prison increase the vulnerability of women and children to sexual and gender-based violence. Therefore, in line with the appeal of the Bishop of Goma, we call on all parties and the population to guarantee the protection of life and access to basic services for all and to prevent sexual violence. Armed clashes in Masisi, Rutshuru, and Nyiragongo continue to result in civilian casualties and displacements, further escalating the humanitarian crisis. Electricity and water supplies remain disrupted in Goma, and medical facilities are completely overwhelmed. Due to the intensity of the ongoing combat and the proximity of the front lines, humanitarian operations have been suspended or readjusted. Immediate action is required to alleviate the suffering of civilians and enable life-saving humanitarian efforts to proceed. Moreover, ethnically motivated attacks in a region with a very sensitive history need to be taken seriously. In the past 4 days, the Human Rights Office has documented at least 1 case of ethnically motivated lynching in an IDP site in Goma, as well as physical and verbal violence against journalists in Goma, all due to their perceived ethnic identity. In light of the ongoing crisis, we urgently require the end of jamming and spoofing, as well as the establishment of humanitarian corridors between Goma, Minova, and Bukavu. This will allow the resupply of essential items, the rotation of humanitarian staff, and the safe movement of civilians. We also appeal for the establishment of high-level diplomatic channels to ensure that critical airports, border points, and humanitarian access routes are reopened without delay. We stress that military action cannot resolve this conflict. It is imperative that all parties cease hostilities and commit to political dialogue in order to prevent further civilian suffering. Resuming the Rwanda process is of the utmost urgency to ensure a path towards de-escalation and to avert the looming threat of a third Congo war. We remind all parties of their obligation to uphold international humanitarian law and stress that attacks on United Nations peacekeepers may constitute war crimes. The degree of suffering that the population in Goma and its environments is enduring is truly unimaginable. Let us please draw on our humanity and do our utmost to bring an immediate end to such levels of violence and suffering. In conclusion, the situation in Goma requires urgent and coordinated international action. Despite the significant challenges, MONUSCO continues to play a vital role in this crisis in the Eastern DRC and has proven to be a beacon for myriad vulnerable groups seeking protection. However, the mission is challenged in ensuring the safety of its staff and premises, which has been severely impacted by the heavy direct and indirect fire used in these last few days, and to address the logistical, human rights, and humanitarian challenges we are all facing to ensure the mission's continued effectiveness. We call on all parties to prioritize the protection of civilians, open humanitarian corridors, and work towards a sustainable and peaceful resolution of the conflict. I thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Viviane van de Peer for the statement. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements. And I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
je
President, I wish
remercie
to
la
thank
représentante spéciale
the
adjointe du
Deputy
secrétaire
Special
général
Representative of the
pour sa
Secretary General
présentation et je
for her
salue
briefing.
la présence
I welcome
parmi
here
nous
among
de la
us
ministre des Affaires étrangères de
the
la
Minister
République
of Foreign
démocratique
Affairs
du Congo.
for the Democratic Republic
Le
of
Conseil de
Congo.
sécurité
The
se
Security
réunit
Council is
une
meeting
nouvelle fois
once again
en raison de la
due
détérioration
to the
continue
sustained
de la
deterioration
situation
of the
dans le Nord
situation
Kivu.
in North Kivu.
Alors nous parlons,
As we
le
speak,
M23 prend le contrôle de
M23
Goma
is taking control of Goma
avec le soutien
with the
actif du
active
Rwanda.
support of Rwanda.
Cela doit constituer
That
un signal
must
d'alerte
set
pour ce
alarm bells
Conseil,
ringing for this
comme
council,
cela avait été
as it
le
did
cas il y a 12 ans.
12 years ago.
Le risque de
The
contagion
risk of
régionale
regional
est
spillover
réel.
is real.
La prise de Goma
The
comporte des
seizure
risques
of Goma
majeurs pour la
brings
sécurité
with
des
it major
populations et elle
risks
conduit au
for the
déplacement de
security of
centaines
civilians
de milliers de
and
personnes.
prompts the
Il est
displacement of hundreds
impératif
of
d'y
thousands of
mettre un
people.
terme. La
It is
France
vital
condamne
to put an
fermement
end
cette
to that
offensive.
situation.
Le
France
M23 doit
firmly
cesser immédiatement
condemns
son
this
offensive
offensive.
et se
M23
retirer
must
des territoires
immediately
dont
cease
il
the
a pris le
offensive
contrôle.
and withdraw from
Le soutien
territories
aux groupes
over
armés
which it has seized
par toutes les
control.
parties
Support
doit
for armed
cesser.
groups by
La
all
priorité va
parties
donc au
must
retour
stop.
au
Our
cessez-le-feu et à
priority
la
must
reprise du
be
dialogue. Il n'y a pas
renewed
d'issue
support for a ceasefire
militaire
and the
au
resumption
conflit.
of dialogue. There
La
is no
France
military
réaffirme
solution
sa
to this conflict.
solidarité
France reaffirms
envers
its
la République
solidarity
démocratique du
with the
Congo et son
Democratic Republic
attachement
and its
à son
unwavering
intégrité
commitment to
territoriale et à sa
upholding the
souveraineté.
DRC's
Ici comme
territorial
ailleurs,
integrity
le
and
respect
sovereignty.
de
Here
la Charte
and
des Nations
elsewhere,
Unies
compliance with the
s'impose.
UN Charter
La France
is
poursuit
the
ses
order of
contacts
the
au plus haut
day.
niveau
France
afin
continues
de
its engagement
relancer
at
un
the highest
processus
level in order
politique.
to
Nous saluons
resume
la
a political
mobilisation
process. We
régionale.
hail
Nous
regional
espérons que la réunion du
mobilization in
Conseil
this
de
regard,
paix et
and we
sécurité
hope
de l'Union
that the
africaine ce
African
jour
Union
et le
PSC
sommet de la
meeting
communauté
today
d'Afrique de
and the
l'Est demain
EAC summit
permettront
tomorrow will
d'avancer dans la
foster
direction d'une paix
progress
durable.
towards a
Le dialogue
sustainable,
engagé dans le
lasting
cadre des
peace.
processus de
Dialogue which
Luanda
has
et
been
Nairobi doit reprendre sans
initiated
délai.
within
La
the
France
Luanda
apporte
and
son
Nairobi
plein
process
soutien
must resume
à ces
as a matter of
processus et elle appelle
urgency.
les parties à
France supports
respecter leurs
these
engagements
regional
conclus
processes
dans le
and call
cadre
upon
du
parties to
processus
uphold
de
their
Luanda.
commitments entered into
Retrait
within the Luanda process.
des
These are
troupes
as follows:
rwandaises du
the
territoire
withdrawal of
congolais
Rwandan troops from
et mise
Congolese
en œuvre
territory
du
and the
plan de
implementation of
démantèlement
the
des
plan
forces
to
démocratiques de
dismantle
libération du
the
Rwanda.
Democratic Forces for the Liberation of
Enfin,
Rwanda, the
la France
FDLR.
tient à réaffirmer
Finally,
avec
France
force son
wishes to
soutien à la
forcefully
MONUSCO.
reaffirm its support for
Son mandat a
MONUSCO.
été renouvelé à
MONUSCO's
l'unanimité
mandate
le
was
20 décembre
unanimously
dernier.
renewed
Nous
on the
condamnons les
20th of
attaques
December.
menées
We
par le
condemn
M23 à
attacks
son encontre
waged by
qui ont
M23
conduit
against
à la
MONUSCO.
mort de plusieurs
These
casques bleus ces derniers jours.
attacks have
Nous
claimed the lives of
exprimons nos
several blue
condoléances à
helmets
leurs
in recent
familles.
days. We convey our
Les personnels
condolences to
et
their
les emprises des
family
Nations Unies
members.
doivent être respectés.
Personnel and
Les attaques
undertakings
contre
of the
les casques
United
bleus,
Nations must be
ainsi que des
respected.
civils et
Attacks
des
against blue
personnels
helmets
humanitaires
civilians
sont
and
susceptibles de
humanitarian
constituer
personnel
des
are
crimes de
liable to
guerre.
constitute war
Un accès
crimes.
humanitaire complet doit être garanti et
Comprehensive
les violations
humanitarian
du
access
droit
must be
international
guaranteed.
humanitaire et des droits
Violations
de
of
l'homme
IHL and
doivent
human
être
rights
condamnés.
must be
La
condemned.
France condamne à
France
nouveau le
once
déploiement de
again
systèmes de
condemns
missiles
the
solaires et le
deployment of
brouillage des signaux
surface-to-air
GPS sur les
missiles and the
zones
scrambling of
contrôlées
GPS
par le
signals in
M23
areas under
avec le soutien
M23
direct
control
des
with the
forces
direct
rwandaises de
support
défense.
of the
La
Rwanda Defence
MONUSCO doit
Force.
pouvoir
MONUSCO
continuer à
must
mener
be
son
able
action
to
pour
continue to
protéger
do its
les
work to
populations.
protect
La
civilians.
situation à
The
Goma
situation in
emporte des
Goma
conséquences
has
humanitaires et politiques
major
majeures.
humanitarian
Nous
and
nous
political
assurerons
ramifications.
que ce
We will
Conseil
ensure
reste
that this
pleinement
Council
mobilisé
remains fully
face à la gravité de
mobilised
cette
in view
situation.
of just how grave
Je vous
this
remercie.
situation is. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. At the outset, we pay tribute to the brave peacekeepers, MONUSCO personnel, and other UN staff who are risking their lives in pursuit of peace and the protection of civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also honor those peacekeepers and SAMI DRC personnel who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of peace. Our deepest condolences go to their families and to the government and people of South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We express our gratitude to Ms. Viviane van der Peer, Deputy Special Representative for Protection and Operations in MONUSCO, for a comprehensive briefing on the dire situation on the ground. We also welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Kaik-Wamba Wagner, State Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the DRC, as well as the representatives of all other participating states in this meeting. Mr. President, we commend the swift convening of this emergency meeting. In less than 72 hours, the Security Council has convened for a second time to address the rapidly evolving situation in Eastern DRC. The A3+ is deeply concerned about the volatility of the situation, the ongoing conflict, and the resulting stalemate, which present a high risk of a broader regional conflict. We have listened attentively to Ms. van der Peer's briefing, and it is clear that the people of Goma, and indeed the wider Congolese population, deserve more than a temporary cessation of the M23/AFC offensive. They need the guns to be silent through a comprehensive political process that will not only end their suffering, but also guarantee respect for the DRC's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, we make the following point. First, we call for an immediate de-escalation of the tension and a restoration of calm in Goma. We urge the M23-AFC to cease its advances and for all parties to exercise the utmost restraint to ensure the protection of civilians. Given the unpredictable and volatile nature of the situation in Goma and surrounding areas, it is imperative that all efforts, whether from MONUSCO or other actors, focus on safeguarding the population from harm. Given Goma's critical role in facilitating access to the region, all efforts to protect civilians must also address the need for humanitarian access, as well as the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and SAMI DRC personnel. The M23/AFC must refrain from obstructing humanitarian assistance or closing humanitarian corridors. The A3+ stresses the critical need for uninterrupted aid to reach the most vulnerable and reminds all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilian lives and ensure the delivery of aid to those in need. Second, as we have stated before, the situation in Eastern DRC will not be resolved through military means. It requires a political solution, supported by diplomacy and regional cooperation. Since our last meeting on Sunday, we have seen significant African diplomatic efforts to support the Congolese people and encourage both the DRC and Rwanda to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. We recognize the leadership of President William Ruto of Kenya, who has called for an East African Community meeting that will take place in the coming hours. Earlier today, the African Union Peace and Security Council convened an emergency ministerial meeting in Addis Ababa. These regional efforts are commendable, but what is needed now is the commitment of both Rwanda and the DRC to engage in direct negotiations under the Rwanda process in good faith with the support of all these initiatives to bring a prompt resolution to the situation in Goma. We strongly call on both Rwanda and DRC to fully engage under the Rwanda process, which is being led by the African Union's designated mediator, His Excellency João Lourenço, President of Angola, to resolve the outstanding issues between them. We are aware that the longer this deadlock persists, the greater the risk of further escalation, which will become increasingly difficult to contain. If the political leadership of Rwanda and the DRC can engage in direct talks, there is hope for delivering much-needed relief to the Congolese people. Third, to achieve a lasting solution that fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, while also addressing Rwanda's security concerns, it is critical for both countries to fully implement their commitment under the Rwanda process. The A3+ remain convinced that the Rwanda process offers the best pathway to peace in the DRC. Through this process, a ceasefire agreement was reached, though regrettably breached, along with an agreement on a harmonized plan, reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism, and a comprehensive concept of operations. The A3+ calls on all parties to honor their commitment under the Rwanda process. Given the unfortunate development on the ground, and in pursuit of peace and stability in the DRC and the wider region, the A3+ urges the government of Rwanda to withdraw its troops from DRC territories without preconditions and without delay, and to cease its reported support to the M23 AFC. Similarly, we urge the government of the DRC to sever its ties with FDLR and to implement its commitment to neutralize this group. We also regret that President Lourenço of Angola had no choice but to evacuate members of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism due to the untenable security situation in Eastern DRC. While the ceasefire agreement has been violated, the mechanism remains incomplete and has not been fully operationalized. Fourth, the natural wealth of the DRC must translate into prosperity for its people. All actors, both local and external, who continue to illegally exploit the country's resources and fuel the conflict must be held accountable. Mr. President, the A3+ expresses deep concern and regret over the reported attacks on embassies in Kinshasa amidst protests relating to the M23 AFC rebel group's offensive in Eastern DRC. These acts against diplomatic missions and their personnel violate international law. As we acknowledge the legitimate concerns of the Congolese people regarding the security situation in Eastern DRC and the activities of the M23 rebel group, we call for the protection of diplomatic missions and strongly urge all parties to refrain from violence, respect diplomatic norms, and exercise restraint. Peaceful and constructive engagement remains the most effective way to address these pressing issues. In closing, we are all well aware of the critical importance of Goma to the Congolese people. Goma is the heart of the DRC. Allowing this vital city to remain under the control of a rebel group sends a disturbing message about the ability or willingness of the international community to prevent threats to international peace and security from flourishing. It is a moral imperative for all actors, including this Council, to act decisively to address the unfolding situation in Goma and to tackle the structural root causes of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking DSOSG Van der Peer for briefing us today. And I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner, alongside other representatives from the region and troop-contributing countries. President, the UK is deeply alarmed by the events that have unfolded on Sunday. 23, with support from the Rwandan Defence Forces, have closed in on Goma. M23 have declared that it is now under their control. The humanitarian impacts are dire. The advances have displaced close to 1 million people in North and South Kivu. Civilian casualties are rising. Hundreds of thousands of people who have already fled from M23's advances, many of them several times before, are now on the move again, with virtually nowhere safe to go. How many times must they pack up their lives and flee? The cycle must end. The UK is also deeply concerned by the limited ability of humanitarian actors to get help to those who need it. Key humanitarian routes, land, water and air, are closed, and hospitals are overcrowded, with staff risking their own lives to provide emergency assistance. More than 800,000 people in the area who were prioritised for support may no longer receive vital food and nutritional assistance. We call on the parties not to obstruct the vital services that humanitarians are providing, and to cease hostilities and uphold the protection of humanitarian workers, as required in international humanitarian law. We also urge all parties to consider essential humanitarian corridors to allow the resupply and delivery of essential life-saving items and the freedom and safe movement of civilians and humanitarian actors. President, the UK is also deeply concerned by the continued endangering of peacekeepers' lives. On Sunday, I expressed my condolences to the families of the 13 who'd already been killed. Since then, 4 more peacekeepers have tragically been killed. We urge an immediate end to this violence. We commend the leadership of MONUSCO, your courage under fire, and we thank you for the vital work of the mission. Finally, President, the UK's Foreign Secretary and Minister for Africa have spoken with Rwanda at the highest levels, as well as with wider partners in the region, and we have made clear that there can be no military solution. We urge all parties to cease hostilities and return to diplomatic talks immediately without preconditions. We remain committed to ensuring this Council takes the necessary action to support an end to this conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
благодарим
we'd
заместителя
like to thank the
спецпредставителя
Deputy
Генерального
Special
секретаря
Representative of the
Viviane
Secretary General,
Ван де Пер
Viviane
за
van der Peer, for her briefing.
Приветствуем
We
участие в заседании
welcome
министра
to
иностранных
the
дел
meeting the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Teresa Wanga, and the representative of the other countries who've requested the floor under Rule 37. Distinguished colleagues, 2 days ago we met in this chamber and discussed the worrisome developments in the situation in the eastern DRC. Over the past 48 hours, the situation has significantly deteriorated, especially with the seizure of Goma, where there are more than 1 million civilians located. Russia firmly condemns the actions of M23. We call for a swift cessation of hostilities and a withdrawal of the rebels of the illegal armed formation from the towns, villages and territory they have seized. We also urge external forces to cease their support for M23 and to recall their military units. There's a need without delay to resume the negotiation process in Rwanda. We must not allow a spillover of the escalation which could threaten the lives of people on both sides of the border and is likely to turn into an interstate conflict on a regional scale. We are seriously concerned by the humanitarian repercussions of what's going on. In front of our very eyes, the already difficult situation in North Kivu is turning into an utter humanitarian disaster. Goma, de facto, is cut off from the outside world. This may have serious consequences for the inhabitants of the town and the IDPs who have fled there. Once again, we would like to express our condolences to the families of the civilian victims of the DRC, the UN peacekeepers, and the fallen SADC soldiers. We stand in solidarity with the governments of the DRC and those states who've lost their service personnel. We wish their speedy recovery. We'd like to underscore that Russia unequivocally condemns the attacks on peacekeepers. It's absolutely unacceptable. We firmly support the UN peacekeeping mission in the stabilization mission in the DRC, its leadership, and the Blue Helmets. We also condemn any attacks and acts of aggression regarding international diplomatic representation. Such actions have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with peaceful demonstrations. We urge Kinshasa to ensure the protection of foreign missions and diplomatic staff, pursuant to the Vienna Convention and its international obligations. The violence in eastern DRC needs to stop. However, there's no military path to resolve this crisis. It is absolutely clear that this is only possible as a result of political agreements. We're convinced that the Luanda process remains the best forum where agreements can be reached. We carefully listened to the representative of Angola during the meeting of the Council on Sunday. Angola clearly stated that the only obstacle to preventing a signature of a reconciliation document between Kinshasa and Kigali was the issue of cessation of a government interaction with the illegal armed formations, and primarily with the M23. Without settling the status of this group as part of the intra-Congolese dialogue, any attempts to improve the situation between the DRC and Rwanda will not bear lasting fruit. Here, there is an urgent need for the resumption of the Nairobi process and the pushing forward of similar regional initiatives. There's no alternative to this. Mr. President, attempts to settle the crisis will also not bear fruit if the countries of the Great Lakes region do not take decisive measures to combat the illegal exploitation and smuggling of natural resources, the lion's share of which, as we all know, come from the eastern DRC, which is beset by instability. There's a need for extra-regional players and large transnational corporations to review their relationship with the use of these resources, because in their interest there's this ongoing illegal supply of blood minerals. These states have all instruments available to them to stop the hot phase, so to speak, of the conflict and to exert pressure on the parties so they return to negotiations. They must be harnessed to protect people's lives and to stop the suffering of hundreds of thousands of civilians. Unfortunately, we've all seen that the state statement of the Council has not stopped the M23 and those who support this group from seizing Goma and continuing their hostilities. Russia, from its side, will do everything possible, including through here in the Council, to stop the escalation and to restore prospects for diplomatic settlement in the interest of stabilizing the situation in the Eastern DRC. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, DSRSG, Vivian van de Peer, for your briefing on the unacceptable events of the last 48 hours. The United States condemns the seizure of Goma and urges this Council to consider measures to halt the territorial advances by Rwandan troops and M23. We stand in firm support of the Congolese people and of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC, and urge Rwanda to respect the same. At the same time, we are watching with concern and deplore the destruction of diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa, and call on the DRC government to respect its obligations to protect diplomatic premises and personnel. We call for an immediate ceasefire, an end to this fighting. Rwanda must withdraw troops from the DRC. Rwanda and the DRC must return to the negotiating table and work toward a sustainable, peaceful solution. We remain deeply concerned about the human rights abuses, displacement, and other impacts on Congolese civilians suffering the brunt of this fighting. Civilians, including the growing number of IDPs and refugees in Sake, Goma, and beyond, must be protected. More than ever, humanitarian actors must be allowed to operate freely and deliver life-saving aid. The rights of all Goma's inhabitants, including former combatants, must be respected. We are similarly concerned that M23's and Rwanda's ongoing advances are opening up a bloody new front to this conflict in South Kivu, which no longer benefits from the roles MONUSCO assumed in the past to protect civilians and facilitate humanitarian assistance. We must not allow this violence to spiral into a wider regional conflict, which would incur a horrific human toll. We mourn all the Congolese who have lost their lives in this fighting. We also extend heartfelt condolences to the countries and families of UN peacekeepers and SAMI DRC troops lost during these attacks. We applaud MONUSCO for its commitment to protect civilians and the bravery and professionalism demonstrated by peacekeepers in recent weeks. As we have said before, Rwanda's support to M23 remains wholly at odds with its robust support to UN peacekeeping. Rwanda said on Sunday that it means no harm to MONUSCO, but 3 peacekeepers have been killed, with many more injured. Additionally, UN and humanitarian personnel, as well as civilians, are endangered by Rwanda's ongoing use of GPS interference and deployment of advanced weapons and systems. Hope is not lost. There is an end in sight to this fighting and a path for a regional dialogue, but the international community must act now. Those unwilling to return to the negotiating table must face a clear and unambiguous response from the Council. We must abandon the delusion of short-term military solutions and work instead toward a durable peace powered by regional economic arrangements for the Great Lakes' vast mineral wealth to ensure stability and prosperity for local populations. Addressing historical grievances, ending ethnic attacks, and other roots of this conflict must be done through a process that has clear incentives and unmistakable accountability. The international community has the tools in hand to end the fighting and build sustainable solutions to the Eastern DRC conflict. We must collectively marshal the will to leverage such tools, as the United States is fully prepared to do, or be prepared to accept unthinkable cost, measured in human lives. Indeed, as the United States observed at our briefing on Sunday, we will consider all the tools at our disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, dear SRG Van der Peer, for your briefing on this serious and evolving situation. I welcome this presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner at this meeting. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council convened urgently to address the situation in eastern DRC. We were briefed on the dramatic escalation of Goma on a knife's edge, of peacekeepers being killed and civilians fleeing. Today, let me be clear. Denmark strongly condemns the ongoing offensive by M23 with support of the Rwanda Defense Forces and the military presence of Rwanda in DRC. We demand that M23, supported by the RDF, immediately halt and reverse their territorial expansion and withdraw. We demand that Rwanda ceases its support to the M23 and that the DRC ceases its support to the FDLR. Colleagues, we've all seen the devastating images. Shelling and heavy artillery in the city center of Goma, civilians fleeing, overcrowded hospitals, and ongoing looting. Denmark is extremely concerned about the risk of urban conflict, as well as sexual violence following the influx of armed elements and the Goma prison escape. Likewise, we are deeply alarmed by the risk of attacks against human rights defenders who now fear individual persecution and ethnically motivated attacks. We also express our deep concern with the recent attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. This is unacceptable. Mr. President, against this dangerous and rapidly developing backdrop, allow me to highlight 4 key points. First, Denmark demands an immediate cessation of hostilities, as well as unhindered, rapid and safe humanitarian access to all populations in and around Goma. This includes open humanitarian corridors, open land borders, and airspace. This cannot be understated. In line with international humanitarian law, medical and humanitarian personnel must be protected, and their ability to provide life-saving care must be ensured. Parties must engage with the UN humanitarian actors for deconfliction purposes and allow trauma and specialized medical teams urgent access. Upholding IHL is not an option, it's an obligation. Second, Denmark firmly condemns any form of violence targeting civilians and objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian populations. We demand their immediate protection and the respect for human rights, regardless of ethnic group, gender, or age. Perpetrators of any attack against civilians must be held to account, no matter their rank or affiliation. Third, we express our full support to MONUSCO as it fulfills its critical mandate facing extremely difficult circumstances. We remind the parties that any involvement in attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a war crime and a basis for sanctioned designations pursuant to United Nations Security Council resolutions. Fourth, Mr. President, as we underlined just 2 days ago, there is no military solution to this conflict, only a political one. We urge DRC and Rwanda to immediately and in good faith fully re-engage and fully recommit to diplomatic talks in the regional peace processes in place. The Luanda and Nairobi processes are the means to solve this conflict. Colleagues, we are not here merely to request that the parties uphold their obligations under international law. When these obligations are consistently violated, it is incumbent upon us to consider all appropriate tools at the Council's disposal. Mr. President, to conclude, the people of the DRC deserve peace. The peoples of the Great Lake region deserve peace. As the UN body charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, this Council should act decisively in support of this goal. Count on Denmark's support. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Algeria for convening this urgent meeting. We also thank Ms. Van der Peer for her briefing. Mr. President, just 2 days ago, this Council condemned the advances of M23 and demanded that the offensive and advances towards Goma immediately stop. Unfortunately, the developments since then have only confirmed our fears. Mr. President, the M23's continued offensive, including the seizure of Goma, with support from Rwanda Defense Forces, is a clear threat to regional stability. We strongly condemn these actions. Slovenia renews its demand for the immediate ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of M23 from the occupied territories. The risk of this conflict escalating into a wider regional crisis must not be underestimated, and recent developments have only amplified these fears. Our message is clear. The violence must stop, and diplomacy must take the lead. Slovenia continues to call on Rwanda to fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory in accordance with international law and to cease its support to M23. We strongly condemn the ongoing violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. They must be respected. We also continue to call on the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups. We are gravely alarmed by the escalating risks in Goma and its surroundings, with the risks of urban fighting and the use of heavy weapons in densely populated areas. There is no time to waste. Mr. President, this is yet another nightmare chapter in this ongoing conflict, forcing hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee, too many of them not for the first time. They are living in fear, they are hungry, they are exposed to vulnerabilities which are further intensified by the presence and influx of armed elements. Restoring and returning to an agreed ceasefire is imperative, but immediate measures are also needed to protect civilians, humanitarian and medical facilities, critical infrastructure, including electricity, water, and communication networks. Safe humanitarian corridors must enable aid delivery and civilian evacuations. Heavy weapons and troops must be withdrawn from the IDP sites. We cannot stress this enough. International humanitarian aid and international humanitarian and human rights law must be upheld by all parties at all times. We call on both countries to exercise maximum restraint. We remain hopeful that strong African engagement through the African Union, the East African Community, and the Luanda processes can help turn the tide through dialogue, and we commend these efforts. Strengthened by this Council, continued engagement, and bilateral efforts, these actions highlight the value of complementing all paths to peace, and Slovenia fully supports them. We urge Rwanda and the DRC to heed calls for peace from the region and the wider international community, and especially those fleeing bullets and bombs, to de-escalate and re-engage in a diplomatic process. Mr. President, we strongly support MONUSCO and its vital mission to protect civilians and recall the need to ensure their safety and security. We unequivocally condemn all attacks and threats against MONUSCO personnel, humanitarian and medical workers who, even as we speak, continue to carry out their life-saving work under fire. In closing, Mr. President, let me express Slovenia's grave concern over the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa. Any such actions are entirely unacceptable and a clear violation of international law. We call for the protection of diplomatic missions in strict accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this emergency meeting following Sundays. I thank Deputy SRSG Van de Per for her sobering briefing. I welcome Minister Wagner of the DRC. At the outset, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast support for MONUSCO and the regional and sub-regional organizations for their tireless efforts in addressing this perilous crisis. We also reiterate our firm commitment to ensuring the safety and security of MONUSCO peacekeepers. At the same time, we strongly condemn the attacks on diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and urgently call for their immediate cessation. We urge the DRC government to fulfill its obligations under international law by ensuring the protection of all diplomatic missions within its territory. Mr. President, I would like to underscore 3 points today as we confront the devastating and fluid developments on the ground. First, we deeply regret that the unified call of the Security Council during Sunday's meeting, and along with the subsequent press statement, has been blatantly disregarded by the M23 and Rwanda. We demand that the M23 immediately halts its unjustifiable military actions in eastern DRC and withdraw from its offensive in Goma. Their reckless actions are forcing civilians to flee with no safe refuge, endangering hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. Equally critical, we urge Rwanda to refrain from further escalating the conflict. We must once again stress our urgent appeal to Rwanda to cease all forms of support to M23 and promptly withdraw any unauthorized military presence from DRC territory. These actions undermine the foundational principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Second, the Security Council must consider all measures at its disposal to bring an end to this devastating conflict. The Council must deliver a more decisive and unequivocal message. In addition, concrete actions must be pursued to effectively influence the strategic calculations of the parties involved in the conflict. We must recall that it was a strong diplomatic pressure that stopped the M23 back in 2012. A thorough investigation into the attacks against the peacekeepers is also vital. The safety and security of UN peacekeepers is a top priority for the Security Council. All perpetrators of violations of international humanitarian and international human rights laws, including sexual and gender-based violence, must also be held accountable. Third, both the DRC and Rwanda must return to meaningful negotiations and fully honor their obligations under the Rwanda process. We reaffirm our full support for President Lourenço of Angola in his critical mediation efforts. We also look forward to the African Union Peace and Security Council playing a key role in exerting necessary pressure, following its emergency ministerial meeting held this morning. Furthermore, we encourage sustained and coordinated pressure from all regional and international actors at the highest levels of government to help urgently de-escalate this conflict. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Security Council must take action. Most importantly, we must not lose sight of the innocent civilians who, even as we meet here today, are awaiting the Council's action. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to constructive engagement, working collectively to swiftly and decisively overturn the consequences of unlawful military actions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. At the outset, President, I'd like to thank you for convening this emergency meeting. I thank DSSG Van der Berg for the briefing. I welcome the Foreign Minister, Kayik Kwamba of DRC, to the meeting today. Since Council's Sunday consideration of the situation in eastern DRC, the ground situation has taken a nosedive. M23 overran Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, causing massive civilian displacement and increasing the risk of a greater conflict. The developments are deeply worrying. China reiterates our firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and opposition to any violations of the UN Charter and international law. China demands that M23 to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw from Goma and other occupied areas. China hopes that Rwanda attaches importance to the calls from SD Guterres and relevant African countries stop military support for M23 and immediately withdraw all its military forces from the territory of the DRC. We urge parties to the conflict to abide by international humanitarian law and to protect the security of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, the security of foreign nationals and institutions in DRC should be protected too. China once again strongly condemns M23's attacks against UN peacekeepers. We salute MONUSCO for sticking to its post under extremely dangerous circumstances and support its continued activities, including protection of civilians pursuant to the mandate of the Security Council. We reiterate that any attacks targeting UN peacekeepers are unacceptable and urge parties to refrain from any actions that may endanger peacekeeping camps and peacekeepers. President, it should be underscored that there is no military solution to the issue of Eastern DRC and that diplomatic negotiations are the only way out. China supports the leaders of Angola, South Africa, Kenya, among others, in conducting emergency communication with countries concerned, and welcome East African Community's announcement of a forthcoming emergency meeting. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to return to the track of diplomatic dialogue as soon as possible and to implement the mutual commitments made under the Rwanda process, including we hope the two countries can actively respond to the mediation efforts of the international community and regional countries and maintain dialogue and negotiations to resolve concerns. At present, the situation in Eastern DRC is at a critical juncture fraught with peril. China supports the Security Council in keeping its unity, taking necessary actions to create favorable conditions to prevent the situation from worsening further and to push for political settlement. I thank you.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this meeting on this urgent topic. We thank Deputy SRS Chief Vivian van der Peer for her valuable briefing. We also welcome the participation of the Foreign Minister of the DRC in this meeting, as well as the permanent representatives of Rwanda, Uruguay, Angola, Guatemala, Zimbabwe, and Burundi. Mr. President, since we met on Sunday, the M23 has largely seems to be in control of Goma. Thousands of people are currently fleeing their homes, adding to the millions already internally displaced in eastern DRC. Many UN and other peacekeeping troops are still encountering mortar and small arms fire. 3 UN peacekeepers have lost their lives and 22 have been injured. Sami DRC has also taken fatalities and casualties. We once again express our deepest condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and pay tribute to their bravery, and especially those who died in the line of duty. I would like to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn M23's offensive on Goma. It must immediately stop its advance and vacate all territories it has occupied. We condemn the violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. All foreign forces must be withdrawn from the territory of the DRC. Second, the M23 siege of Goma has grave humanitarian consequences. The UN Secretariat and other humanitarian actors, in consultations with the DRC, should urgently develop a plan for the protection of civilians, the handling of internally displaced people, and addressing the humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. The M23 must not impede access for immediate, safe, and unhindered humanitarian aid and humanitarian personnel to the affected areas and to the affected people, including through humanitarian corridors. Third, we strongly condemn the continued attacks on the peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers constitute war crimes, and those responsible for perpetrating, supporting, and sponsoring these attacks must be held accountable. At the same time, we deplore the attacks on diplomatic facilities in Kinshasa. We ask the UN Secretariat and MONUSCO, in consultations with the DRC, to urgently present an effective plan to ensure the safety and security of MONUSCO and other peacekeepers, including through the steps that they have already taken. Fourth, we stress that there is no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. We call on Rwanda and the DRC to cease hostilities and to immediately revive the Luanda process of dialogue under the mediatory leadership of President Lorenzo of Angola. The understandings reached under this process, that is the neutralization of the FDLR and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC, should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and resolved. We hope that the reconciliation within DRC will be achieved, especially through the Nairobi process. We also extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. Fifth, we appreciate the communiqué issued today by the African Peace and Security Council on the situation in DRC, in eastern DRC. African institutions would no doubt have to play a very important role in bringing the decades-old conflict to an end in accordance with the call for African solutions to African problems and silencing the guns. Sixth, the Security Council and the Secretary General will need to evaluate the future role of MONUSCO in the evolving circumstances in eastern DRC. In our view, the mission must be maintained and its mandate reviewed and adapted to respond to the new circumstances and operating environment. The mission will need to be adequately reinforced and equipped to discharge its current or modified mandate. Finally, Mr. President, we once again call to address the issue of the illegal exploitation of the DRC's natural resources, which is the root cause of this conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Ms. van der Per, Deputy SRSG, for briefing us on this urgent meeting today and commend the courage of all of MONUSCO's personnel in these very difficult circumstances. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honourable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in our meeting. Mr. President, allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the capture of the town of Sake on January 23rd and the invasion of Goma on January 27th by M23. We reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. The presence of Rwandan troops on the territory of DRC and the support to the M23, as also stated by the Secretary General on January 26, are very concerning and are strongly condemned. We call on Rwanda to cease its support to the M23 and to withdraw its forces now. Second, we call for urgent de-escalation, and we stress that it is more imperative than ever that particularly Rwanda and DRC commit to the ceasefire as agreed last August, re-engage the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. Greece will continue to support African-led initiatives and welcomes the emergency ministerial session on the conflict in Eastern DRC convened today by the African Union Peace and Security Council and the upcoming meeting of SADC tomorrow. We call DRC and Rwanda to return immediately to the table of negotiations. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian security consequences of the M23 offensive in North Kivu. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. We strongly condemn all forms of human rights violations, abuses, violence against civilians, sex and gender-based violence in particular. Fourth, We reiterate our full support to MONUSCO, which is acting within its mandate and doing critical work in the DRC, including in the area of Goma, stress a strong commitment to the safety and security of its peacekeepers, condemns the attacks committed against personnel, and offer condolences to the families and government of the deceased peacekeepers. MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. Attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes, and those attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for potential sanction designations. Mr. President, we stand ready to consider any further engagement of this Council as unnecessary. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Damos la más cordial bienvenida a la representante especial adjunta de MONUSCO, la señora Vivian Van de Per. Le agradecemos por su presentación informativa y también a la participación de la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores, Su Excelencia Thérèse Kayikwamba-Wagner, de la República Democrática del Congo. Señor presidente, distinguidos miembros del Consejo de Seguridad, Panamá expresa su profunda preocupación por la alarmante situación que se desarrolla en la República Democrática del Congo. En los últimos días hemos sido testigos de una escalada de violencia que ha culminado con la entrada del M23 en la ciudad de Goma, con el apoyo de las fuerzas de defensa de Rwanda, según lo informado por el grupo de expertos. Esta ofensiva ha desencadenado una crisis humanitaria de proporciones devastadoras. Miles de civiles se han visto obligados a abandonar sus hogares, buscando refugio en condiciones precarias y enfrentando la suspensión de servicios básicos esenciales. La interrupción de estos servicios ha dejado a la población civil en una situación de vulnerabilidad extrema. La falta de acceso a agua potable, electricidad, atención médica y otros servicios esenciales agrava el sufrimiento de los desplazados y residentes locales. El Alto Comisionado de las Naciones Unidas para los Refugiados ha expresado su profunda preocupación por el agravamiento de la violencia y la crisis humanitaria en el este de la RDC, señalando que el número de desplazados internos ha aumentado en más de 400.000 en lo que va del año. La República de Panamá reitera su rechazo a cualquier forma de violencia que atente contra la seguridad e integridad física de la población civil. Hacemos un llamado urgente a todas las partes involucradas para que cesen las hostilidades de inmediato y respeten el derecho internacional humanitario. Apoyamos plenamente el llamado de las entidades de las Naciones Unidas para habilitar pausas humanitarias temporales en áreas críticas, así como para el establecimiento de corredores humanitarios seguros y efectivos. De igual manera, reiteramos nuestro firme respaldo a la invaluable labor de la MONUSCO, cuyo compromiso con la paz y la seguridad en la región es incuestionable. Reconocemos los complejos desafíos que enfrenta la misión en un entorno altamente inestable y apreciamos profundamente sus incansables esfuerzos para proteger a la población civil y fortalecer las instituciones del Estado de Derecho. Señor presidente, el domingo durante la sesión de emergencia, Panamá expresó su solidaridad y acompañamiento a los cascos azules y sus familias. Es inaceptable que hoy nuevamente nos veamos en la terrible situación de tener que expresar nuevamente nuestro más sentido pésame por la pérdida de la vida de 4 más que murieron en la línea de combate. Reconocemos los esfuerzos regionales que se llevan a cabo para enfrentar esta crisis. En particular, destacamos la iniciativa del presidente de Kenia, William Ruto, quien ha convocado para mañana una reunión de emergencia de la Comunidad de África del Este y el Consejo de Paz y Seguridad de la Unión Africana. Ambas iniciativas con el objetivo de garantizar la protección de los civiles y fomentar el diálogo sincero entre las partes en conflicto. Señores, estamos observando la escalada de este conflicto en tiempo real. Es el momento oportuno para que este Consejo actúe de manera contundente con el fin de garantizar el acceso irrestricto a la ayuda humanitaria y restablecer los servicios básicos en las áreas afectadas. La población congoleña debe recibir el apoyo de la comunidad internacional basado en los principios de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas para evitar una crisis regional. Reafirmamos nuestro compromiso inquebrantable con la soberanía e integridad territorial de la República Democrática del Congo. Exigimos al M23 y a las Fuerzas de Defensa de Ruanda a detener de manera inmediata su avance y a proceder a su retiro completo, respetando plenamente el acuerdo del alto al fuego y los procesos de mediación en curso. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You have the floor, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président, distingués membres du Conseil, permettez-moi au nom du gouvernement et du peuple de la République démocratique du Congo d'exprimer mes remerciements pour la convocation de cette seconde réunion en 48 heures sur la situation sécuritaire dans mon pays. Je tiens à saluer l'engagement de la présidence algérienne du Conseil, ainsi que les efforts constants de ceux qui, malgré les vents contraires, œuvrent sans relâche pour la paix et la sécurité internationale. Avant de poursuivre, permettez-moi de saluer le sacrifice ultime consenti au cours des dernières 48 heures par les soldats de la paix de la MONUSCO et de la SAMI-DRC en République démocratique du Congo. Je rends également hommage au courage et à la résilience des forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, ainsi qu'à la mémoire des populations civiles congolaises
Congolese civilians who have been victims of the merciless attack by Rwanda. We, the Democratic Republic of Congo, recognize also the losses amongst Rwandan soldiers during the clashes, whilst Rwanda is obstinately insisting on its false narrative, claiming that it is not conducting a war in the DRC. This stance is very costly to the families of hundreds of Rwandan soldiers died, who died in the senseless war. Even if their own country refuses to recognize them, to pay tribute to them, or to allow their families to the right to mourn their losses, we, the Democratic Republic of Congo, are well aware that war crosses all borders. We recognize that the madness that Kigali has plunged us into has caused victims everywhere. As regards the protests this morning in Kinshasa, here I would like to reassure our partners that the government of the DRC has taken all necessary measures to ensure the protection of the accredited diplomatic missions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. These sincerely regrettable incidents in no way regret the constant commitment of our country to the respect for international law and to the principles that govern diplomatic relations.
Aujourd'hui, si nous sommes ici encore une fois, en moins de 48 heures, nous devons impérativement avoir le courage de nous poser cette question. Quel impact concret la déclaration de ce Conseil? Quel était l'impact concret de la déclaration de ce Conseil du 26 janvier? Monsieur le Président, à Goma, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, soutenues par la MONUSCO et les troupes de la SADC, continuent à bravoure à combattre. Mais cette défense héroïque et déterminée ne saurait masquer l'ampleur du drame. Une fois de plus, les soldats de la paix, dont 4 soldats sud-africains de la SAMI-DRC, ont payé le prix ultime de leur détermination. Ces victimes de plus ne sont autres que le résultat d'actes criminels constitutifs de crimes contre l'humanité, de crimes de guerre perpétrés par les RDF en toute liberté et sous silence de ce Conseil. Mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi une parenthèse. Parmi les 4 valeureux casques bleus sud-africains tombés à Goma, L'un
One of
d'entre
the
eux n'a pas
4
succomé
brave
directement
South
pendant le
African
combat,
blue helmets who
mais il a
died in
succombé à ses
Goma did
blessures.
not die
Ce drame
directly in the
illustre
fighting,
tragiquement la
but he
réalité
succumbed to
actuelle.
his injuries. This
Des vies se
tragedy
perdent dans une ville
illustrates
assiégée,
tragically
privée
the current
d'électricité,
reality.
d'eau, de
Lives
voies
are lost in a
d'évacuation.
besieged
Tel est
town,
aujourd'hui le
cut
sort
off
de
from
millions de
electricity,
personnes à Goma,
water and escape routes.
piégées,
This
sans
is the
accès à l'eau,
fate
à
today of millions of
l'électricité,
people in
à la
Goma, trapped
nourriture
without
ou à un
access to
abri
water,
sûr.
electricity,
C'est la tragédie
food or
partagée
safety.
par les
This
citoyens
is a
congolais,
tragedy shared by Congolese
ainsi que par des
citizens,
milliers de
as well as
soldats
by
de la paix
millions, or
et
thousands rather,
d'humanitaires
of
pris au piège.
peacekeepers and
Je
humanitarian
remémore les
workers
mots
who are
poignants
trapped.
de la
I would just
représentante
like to
spéciale,
reiterate the poignant
Madame
words
Bintou
of
Keita, il y
the
a 2
Special
jours.
Representative
Nous sommes
Bintou
piégés.
Keita 2 days ago. We're
We are
trapped.
trapped. Les dernières 24 heures, plus de 100 blessés ont été accueillis dans les centres de santé du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge. Et la situation humanitaire continue à se dégrader, avec plus de 500 000 nouveaux déplacés dans la province du Nord et du Sud Kivu. Pour le mois de janvier uniquement. Les forces de défense rwandaises et leurs supplétifs du M23 ont franchi nos frontières, occupé nos villes et nos villages, chassé nos compatriotes de leur foyer et instauré une administration parallèle, en violation du droit international et ce, en violation des positions claires de ce Conseil. Jusqu'à quand le Rwanda continuera-t-il d'abuser votre respect et de votre autorité? Quel instrument international doit-il encore violer pour que ce Conseil prenne enfin les mesures nécessaires contre Kigali, de la Charte des Nations Unies au droit international humanitaire, aux droits de l'homme, en passant par les processus de paix de Luanda et de Nairobi, le Rwanda a prouvé que vos déclarations ne lui importent guère. Le cessez-le-feu du 4 août 2024 n'a été pour lui qu'une chimère. Et il s'est pris d'ignorer vos avertissements du 26 janvier, allant jusqu'à bombarder des hôpitaux et des maisons dans la ville de Goma. Pas plus tard que dimanche le 26 janvier, le Rwanda, pays contributeur en troupes des Nations Unies, par le truchement de son représentant, a considéré ce Conseil comme complice de sa déstabilisation, allant jusqu'à associer la MONUSCO à cette démarche invraisemblable. Si cette stratégie a porté des fruits par le passé, le temps de la manipulation et du mensonge est désormais révolu. La vie de la population civile, privée de moyens de subsistance depuis maintenant 4 jours à Goma, dépend des décisions que vous devez prendre aujourd'hui. Nous ne sommes pas venus aujourd'hui pour vous dire ce que vous ne connaissez pas. Mais nous sommes venus vous demander de prendre le courage de faire ce qui est droit et ce qui est dans vos prérogatives. Les vies des civils ne peuvent pas être pendues à la machinerie politicienne qui observe sans agir. Nous exigeons des actions. Reconnaître la responsabilité du Rwanda dans les violations multiples de notre souveraineté, ainsi que dans les atrocités qu'il commet, a été insuffisant pour qu'il cesse sa poursuite du conflit. Les victimes ne sont plus seulement congolaises. Le Rwanda a frappé l'Afrique et l'Amérique latine en tuant des militaires sud-africains, malawites et uruguayens venus protéger les civils. Il a frappé ce Conseil en tuant des casques bleus de la MONUSCO. N'est-ce pas une preuve suffisante pour vous que lors de chacune des réunions convoquées par ce Conseil, la liste des orateurs regorge de pays d'Afrique et d'ailleurs, cherchant à vous pousser à agir? Dimanche, c'était l'Afrique du Sud, le Burundi, l'Uruguay. Aujourd'hui encore, nous sommes rejoints dans un esprit de solidarité par nos frères et sœurs de l'Angola, de l'Afrique du Sud, de l'Uruguay, du Guatemala, du Zimbabwe, du Sénégal, du Burundi. Tous ont répondu, car l'humanité est en jeu. Tous sont venus voir ce que vous allez faire. À quel seuil de catastrophe humanitaire et de violation flagrante de notre territoire devrez-vous enfin agir pour sanctionner les responsables du M23 et les officiers rwandais et leurs complices? Si ce Conseil ne sanctionne pas, l'histoire marquera ce temps comme l'époque de l'impuissance et de l'indifférence du Conseil de sécurité. Le droit de rachat de ce Conseil sur cette crise n'est nulle part ailleurs que dans des actions immédiates. Et déjà, nous voyons venir une manœuvre prévisible. Le Rwanda, qui a délibérément dirigé cette guerre sur le territoire d'un autre État souverain, le nôtre, commence à revendiquer que les combats atteignent son propre sol. Mais que pouvait-il espérer? Une guerre excellente ne connaît pas de frontières. Elle est sale. Elle consume tout sur son passage. Les forts comme les faibles. Les 72 dernières heures ne sont qu'un échantillon de la tragédie régionale qui menace. Une tragédie que le peuple congolais connaît depuis des décennies. Une tragédie nationale que ce Conseil peut encore arrêter et une tragédie régionale que ce Conseil peut prévenir par une action résolue et courageuse. Monsieur le Président, certains voudraient faire croire
Some people, sir, would
que
like
l'inaction
to make believe that
est une
inaction
solution
is an
africaine.
African solution.
Nous sommes un pays africain
We are
sous
an
attaque.
African country
Mais cette
under
attaque
attack.
dépasse nos
This
frontières.
attack
Elle
is
est une
going
attaque
beyond
contre
our
le
borders. It is
multilatéralisme,
an attack
contre
on
les principes mêmes des Nations
multilateralism,
Unies,
on the very
contre
principles of
chacun
the
de
United
nous.
Nations,
Laisser
against
cette crise
each
s'enliser
and
sous
every one of
prétexte
us.
qu'elle serait un problème africain,
Allowing this crisis to continue,
nécessitant une solution
stating that
africaine,
it's an
revient à
African
trahir
problem that
l'esprit de
requires an African
solidarité
solution,
internationale qui
betrays the
fonde cette
spirit of
organisation
international solidarity
et
that was the
l'esprit
very
de
bedrock of our
responsabilité de
organization
sécurité
and the spirit
collective
of collective
qui
security
justifie même votre
responsibility
présence comme
that
membre de ce
justifies
Conseil.
your very
Nous
presence as
réitérons
members of
avec
this council.
insistance nos 5
We
demandes urgentes.
reiterate
1.
our
Le
5
retrait
urgent
immédiat
demands.
des troupes
1. The
rwandaises et
immediate
la
withdrawal
cessation
of
des
Rwandan
hostilités.
troops and the
2.
cessation of
La
hostilities.
mise en
2.
place
The
de sanctions
establishment
ciblées
of
contre la chaîne
targeted
de
sanctions
commandement des
against the
RDF
RDF
et
chain of
les
command
décideurs politiques
and
rwandais.
the
3.
Rwandan political
L'imposition
decision
d'un
makers. 3.
embargo
The
sur les
imposition
ressources
of an
naturelles
embargo
déclarées
on
comme rwandaises, en
natural
particulier
resources
le
declared as
coltan et l'or.
Rwandan.
4. La
4.
révocation du Rwanda
The
en tant que
withdrawal of
contributeur
Rwanda
de
as
troupes
a
aux
troop
Nations Unies.
contributing
On
country
ne
to
peut
the
être à la
UN.
fois
One
agresseur
cannot be
et
the
prétendre
aggressor
jouer un
and
rôle
claim
dans la
to
promotion
play
de la
a
paix.
role in promoting peace.
5. La
5.
transparence totale
Total
sur les transferts
transparency
d'armes au
on
Rwanda.
arms
Ces
transfers from
transferts doivent
Rwanda.
être
These
arrêtés
transfers must
immédiatement
be
pour
stopped
empêcher qu'ils
immediately
continuent à
to
alimenter
prevent
la
them from
violence
continuing
et
to fuel
l'instabilité.
violence and instability.
Monsieur le Président, nous
Mr.
sommes ici
President, we're
parce que
here
c'est ici que
because
le monde doit
here
gérer ses
the
défis.
world
C'est
needs
ici,
to
si ce
resolve
Conseil
its
échoue,
differences and
la
face
rue
its
va s'en
challenges.
charger.
If the
Comme vous le savez
council
très bien,
fails,
la rue n'a pas d'ordre, ni de
then
tempérament.
it is the
Il y a
street
48
that is
heures
going
devant
to
ce
take
Conseil de
charge.
sécurité,
And as
nous
you
avons une
know,
nouvelle
there's no
fois attiré
order,
votre attention sur
no
la
calmness
déclaration
on
de
the
guerre du
streets.
Rwanda
48
contre
hours
nos
ago,
pays.
the
Une balle
before
qui
the
frappe dans le
Security
cœur
Council, we
ne saurait
once
laisser
again
le
drew your
reste du corps
attention to
indifférent.
the
La
declaration of
République
war
démocratique
of
du
Rwanda
Congo est
against
en
my
guerre
country.
et face à cette agression,
A shot has
l'inaction
been launched
collective
into the
semble
heart,
malheureusement embraser
and
cette
the Democratic
situation
Republic of
jusque
Congo
dans
is
sa
at
capitale.
war.
Je
And
réitère ainsi
collective
encore une fois que le
inaction
gouvernement de la
faced
République
with this,
démocratique du Congo
unfortunately, is just
condamne avec fermeté
spilling
toute attaque
over
contre
into
les
the
missions diplomatiques
capital.
accréditées
Indifference
en
is not an
République
option. The
démocratique du Congo.
council must
Cependant,
not remain
l'indifférence n'est plus une option. Ce
passive.
Conseil ne devrait se
The
permettre de rester
council
passif,
must
car chaque
not
jour sans réponse
do this, because
concrète
each day
fait grandir
without
le
a
prix du
specific
silence. Le
concrete
moment est venu
response
pour ce Conseil
means that
de démontrer
silence
son courage
just
et son
becomes
engagement.
louder. The
L'histoire
time has come for the
retiendra vos
council
choix.
to demonstrate
Que
its
cette
courage and
Assemblée
its
soit le
commitment.
rempart de la
This
justice
this
et de la
chamber
dignité
needs
humaine.
to
Je
be
vous
the
remercie.
rampart of justice and human dignity. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kaikwamba Wagner for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to once again commend Algeria's able leadership of the Council for the month of January. I'm grateful for your invitation to participate in this important meeting and thank all the member states that spoke before me. I'd like to recognize Ms. Viviane van der Perry, Deputy SRSG. I also recognize Honorable Teresa Kaikwamba Wagner, DRC Minister for Foreign Affairs. I also would like to recognize the participation of the representatives of Angola, Uruguay, Zimbabwe, Burundi, South Africa, Guatemala, and Senegal. Less than 2 days ago, this council gathered to discuss the ongoing situation in the eastern DRC. Since then, it has rapidly evolved. On 26 January, the M23/AFC rebel group is reported to have taken over the city of Goma. This triggered retreating forces from DRC coalition to attack and shell the Rwandan territory. Rwanda condemns in the strongest terms these attacks on the town of Rubavu in the northern province, which killed 5 people, innocent Rwandan civilians, and left another 35 injured. This indiscriminate shelling is unacceptable war crime, and further proof of the necessity of maintaining Rwanda's defensive posture put in place precisely to prevent this kind of threat. I would like to recall that these attacks are not the first, but the latest of a long list of provocative actions by the government of the DRC. I'd like to also recall that Rwanda has always shown restraint and sought to engage the DRC in dealing with the root causes of insecurity in the region and along our common border. Rwanda will always stand for peace, as we have the most to lose in the continuation of this conflict. I have always emphasized that Rwanda knows the dividend of peace. We suffered insecurity. Our nation was almost a failed state. So we have worked hard to build peace and to work for peace in the region. So we are strongly committed to peace, peaceful coexistence, and a peaceful region. The coalition of anti-Rwanda forces on our border poses an existential threat to our country, which is not the case for the government of Kinshasa, which feels insulated from whatever happens 2,000 kilometers away. The border of Rwanda is 2,000 kilometers away from Kinshasa. A shell from across in DRC that falls on Rwandan territory falls on a very densely populated villages, and lives are lost. Even one bullet takes a life. Those in Kinshasa will not stay awake when such insecurity happens. So we are very serious when we talk of an existential security threat to Rwanda. Mr. President, the action of this coalition are equally devastating for Congolese. Rwanda is providing humanitarian relief to incoming refugees together with the help of international partners on the ground. A temporary refugee camp has been set up in Rubavu to provide further assistance and shelter to those who are displaced. In addition, many countries have requested our assistance in facilitating the evacuation of their nationals, including European countries of origin of the mercenaries who have been deployed in eastern DRC. Rwanda also facilitated the transit of MONUSCO and other United Nations personnel through Kigali. Additionally, the hundreds of militia members and FARDC forces we have received have been disarmed and treated with respect and dignity in accordance with international law, and those who are sick are being treated. I would like here also to express Rwanda's condolences to MONUSCO forces that died in this process. On the contrary, we have been dismayed by the reports of attacks and looting of diplomatic missions in Kinshasa, including the Rwandan embassy and several other embassies of members of this council. These thuggish acts, most of which are committed in the passive presence of DRC security forces, are in total violation of international law, especially the 1961 Vienna Convention. Rwanda therefore calls on the DRC to take its diplomatic obligations seriously and hold perpetrators accountable. I'd like to emphasize that those who followed the media, the Rwandan embassy in Kinshasa was among those that was totally burnt down. Mr. President, the deteriorating security situation in the eastern DRC has only one immediate cause: the obsession by the president of the DRC for a military solution and thirst for regime change in Rwanda. We have said this over and over to this council. Indeed, this situation could have been solved a long time ago if President Tshisekedi had demonstrated political will and good faith in finding a lasting solution to this conflict. I would like to recall that President Tshisekedi took the unilateral decision to expel the M23 from the political dialogue under the Nairobi process, as well as East African Community Regional Force, which was deployed by EAC. Yet the EAC Regional Force had led to a ceasefire that held for 6 months, which led the M23 to relinquish 80% of the territory it was holding. This was from March 2023 to September 2023. To fill in this vacuum, the DRC instead decided to replace it with a SADC-led force with a more offensive mandate. These two unilateral decisions by President Tshisekedi have caused the Nairobi process to stall, despite numerous attempts to revive it. Mr. President, Council members, as if frustrating the Nairobi process was not enough, the DRC President repeatedly made inflammatory statements against Rwanda. For instance, in December 2022, in a statement addressed to Rwandan youth, he promised to help them, and I quote his exact words, "Get rid of this diabolic regime in Kigali." Those are the President's words. Moreover, in December 2023, during the last campaign, he doubled down, saying that he would bomb Kigali without even setting boots on the ground. These are the exact words of the President of DRC against Rwanda, promising to cause regime change. This echoes a similar statement made on 17th November 2024 in Katanga, when he told military and provisional leadership that if he is given the opportunity to revise the constitution, he would use this new term to overthrow the government in Kigali. Those are clear and constant threats that Rwanda will never take lightly. To implement these threats, President Tshisekedi has mobilized a large coalition which includes the FDLR, genocidal militia, European mercenaries, Wazalendo militias, Burundian armed forces, and some DRC. Council members, consequently, Rwanda calls on all foreign forces deployed in the DRC, international community, including some members sitting in this council, have their fair share of the blame in what is happening today in the DRC, at least to condemn even threats of regime change from one member state to another. You also chose to turn a blind eye on these inflammatory statements and the build-up of the aforementioned military coalition, never once condemning the regime change agenda behind them. Mr. President, Council members, Rwanda remains committed to the Rwanda process, given important milestones that were achieved in the process that was led by President Lorenzo and Angola. And one of the milestones, the adoption of a concept of operations, the CONOPS, of the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and lifting Rwanda's defensive forces, and a ceasefire that was agreed and was holding from August 2024. The remaining security issues between Rwanda and the DRC was the AFC M23 question. This question was therefore to be addressed. Unfortunately, in the ministerial meeting of 14th December, the DRC categorically refused any commitment of dialogue with the AFC M23. This then prevented a consensus on a draft peace agreement to be signed the following day by heads of state. Therefore, the only solution was to postpone the summit, as Rwanda is not interested in just a photo op. The heads of state were going to Angola for only one agenda item, to sign an agreement that should have been agreed. Mr. President, Rwanda deploys the intensification of hostilities between the Congolese coalition and the AFC/M23 since the breakdown of the summit. More worrying is the intensive shelling by FDLR, FARDC, from densely populated areas, including IDP camps, towards other populated areas held by AFC and M23. In order to bring about peace in Eastern DRC, Rwanda calls on the following. 1, the full implementation of mainly the neutralization of FDLR, which will lead to the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures. 2, beyond the CONOPS, Rwanda calls on the withdrawal of foreign troops, part of the Congolese coalition, and we call for European mercenaries to be repatriated and be held accountable. 3, Rwanda believes that MONUSCO can be useful in restoring peace in Eastern DRC by stopping its support to a national army with a regime change mandate, as well as its support to a UN-sanctioned genocidal force and European mercenaries. Rwanda also reiterates its position that it has no hostile intentions against MONUSCO, despite its total failure over the past 26 years. 4, Rwanda believes in the strict adherence to the ceasefire of August 4th, 2024 by all parties, which would allow for a favorable environment for direct dialogue between the DRC and the M23. In this regard, I want to inform you that His Excellency President Kagame spoke with his counterparts from South Africa, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, yesterday. This positive conversation, held in a cordial atmosphere, was productive as it supported the already agreed ceasefire and the resumption of political talks, including with the AFC and M23. I also wish to inform you that tomorrow there will be a virtual ESC summit convened by His Excellency President Ruto on this very question. Before I close, I would like to mention that the DRC government has just claimed that there are Rwandan forces that died in DRC. I want to say that this is categorically not correct. If it was correct, DRC would have provided evidence. I don't think they have that evidence. If they have evidence of any Rwandan soldiers who have died on DRC soil, they should produce that evidence, which I'm sure, I know 100% sure, is not available because that's not true. In closing, Rwanda is committed to the pursuit of a political solution to the conflict. However, we believe that the Rwanda process must not be personalized or taken as an end in itself, but as a tool to resolve security concerns between Rwanda and the DRC. Both the Rwanda and Nairobi process urgently require new impetus in order to achieve sustainable peace and stability for all the countries in our region. We hope that the recent engagements will work towards that goal. I thank you, Council members.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Angola.
His Excellency Ambassador Amar Benjama, President of United Nations Security Council for the month of January, distinguished members of the Security Council, we welcome the presence of Her Excellency Teresa Kayakwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Ambassador Ernesto Remusillo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. We thank Mrs. Viviane Van Perre, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Protection and Operations, for her briefing on the latest developments on the ground and for her bravery in keeping high the UN flag under these difficult circumstances. We deplore today's attacks against diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and call on DRC authorities to ensure their protection under the 1961 Vienna Convention on the Diplomatic Relations. Mr. President, we are at a very critical juncture in the pursuit of lasting peace in the DRC and the normalization of diplomatic relations between the DRC and Rwanda. The M23 has made a significant military advance in North Kivu province, worsening the already fragile security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC. It resulted in the capture of the provincial capital, Goma, despite calls by the United Nations Security Council, the African Union, and the other actors in the international community to halt this military advance. This is a make-or-break moment that requires wisdom and pragmatism from the concerned parties and all relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations, the African Union, and sub-regional organizations. Although His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, facilitator of the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda, is making every effort to advance the Rwanda process, the security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC has suffered a substantial deterioration in the last few weeks. On 24th January 2025, the Angolan head of state expressed deep concern over the serious deterioration of the peace and security situation in the eastern DRC. He condemned and denounced the actions of M23 and its supporters, which undermine the progress made under the Rwanda to the negotiating table. To the conflict immediately to the negotiating table. Due to the rapid deterioration of the situation, Members of the enhanced ad hoc verification mechanism and the expanded joint verification mechanism deployed in the city of Goma under the Rwanda process to support the pacification process in the eastern DRC on Sunday had to be evacuated to Angola. Mr. President, the UN Security Council is the world's last resort when it comes to maintaining international peace and security. Its mandate is clear and must be respected and upheld. Today, we have one simple and direct message to this Council. The conflict in DRC must cease, and the warring parties must return to the negotiating table. The ongoing hostilities in the eastern DRC have already claimed the lives of thousands of civilians and injured many others. Credible reports indicated that Goma has neither running water nor electricity, thus making living conditions of the population and those living in the IDP camps almost unbearable. In addition, millions of people have fled their homes and they don't know where to go. We demand the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of M23 from the occupied area, as well as the end of its establishment of parallel administration in DRC territory. We call for the full respect of integrity of DRC in accordance with the UN Charter, the international law, and the principles of sovereign equality of all member states. We call on all parties in conflict to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law, the protection of civilians, IDP camps and medical sites, and the protection of peacekeepers, while noting that attacks on civilians and peacekeepers constitute war crimes. Direct attacks to MONUSCO and some DRC personnel are unacceptable, and those responsible must be held accountable. We urge the signatories of the August 2024 ceasefire agreement to urgently resume dialogue without preconditions. In this context, we call on both parties to return to the Rwanda process under the facilitation of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. Mr. President, the hardly won gains achieved through the Rwanda process following months of intense negotiation must be preserved. In his capacity as the African Union Champion for Peace and Reconciliation, mandated to facilitate the mediation between Rwanda and DRC, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço undertook several initiatives to resolve the difference between the two countries and made substantial progress, including the signing of the DRC-Rwanda ceasefire agreement on the 30th July 2024, which entered into force on 4th August 2024. On 15 December 2024, he convened a summit of the presidents of the two countries, which was subsequently postponed due to disagreement regarding how to address the M23 issue. We reiterate our call for a speedy and unconditional de-escalation of hostilities and genuine and renewed commitment to peace by both sides. Immediate return to the negotiating table is the only way out, since the conflict and security challenges in the eastern DRC have no military solution. The parties must continue exploring ways to settle the M23 pending issue to create conditions to reschedule the tripartite summit. We encourage the resumption of contacts between His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya, and the facilitator mandate by the East African Community, with the armed groups in DRC, including the M23 under the Nairobi process, to address sources of grievances that have led to the current level of insecurity in DRC. The United Nations, the African Union, sub-regional organizations, and leaders in the region must work together in a complementary approach to bring DRC and Rwanda back to the Rwanda process. To conclude, Mr. President, we continue encouraging all parties to avoid any actions or rhetoric that can further escalate tensions, including provocative language and inflammatory public statements, which are counterproductive to the diplomatic efforts to achieve a lasting solution to this conflict that has prevailed for so long. In his quest to advance the Rwanda process, in the last few days, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, the President of the Republic of Angola, has been in contact with several African leaders. Today, he spoke with His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of the Republic of Mauritania and current President of the African Union, and His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and current President of the Economic Community of Central Africa States, to which DRC and Rwanda are members. Angola reiterates the steadfast commitment of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço to continue playing his role as the facilitator mandated by the African Union to assist the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda to achieve peace and security in the Eastern DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Angola for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Agradecemos la
We are
información
grateful for the
proporcionada por la
information
señora
provided by Ms. Vivian van der Pierre,
representante especial adjunta
Deputy
para la
Special
protección y
Representative for
operaciones en la
Protection
misión de
and Operations
estabilización de las
in the
Naciones
United
Unidas
Nations
y la
Stabilization
República
Mission in the
Democrática del
Democratic
Congo,
Republic of the
MONUSCO,
Congo,
así como la
MONUSCO.
convocatoria de
We're
esta
also
reunión
grateful to
informativa por parte de la
the
presidencia.
President of Algeria for convening this briefing.
Destacamos el
We
rol del
underscore
Consejo
the
de Seguridad en
important
este
role
tema
played
que
by
ha
the Security
impulsado
Council on this issue.
un alto al fuego
Their
en
work
línea
has
con el
prompted
comunicado
a
emitido por
ceasefire
sus
in line with
miembros
the
en la
press
noche del
statement
domingo
issued
26
by
de
the
enero,
Council members
cuyo
on the
contenido
26th of
coincidimos,
January. We
con cuyo
fully
contenido coincidimos
agree with
totalmente.
the content of that press statement.
Agradecemos en ese
Moreover, we're
sentido a los
grateful
miembros del Consejo
to
por su
Council
receptividad
members for their
y
willingness
rapidez
to
para
address
atender el
this
tema,
issue and for
pero
their expeditious
lamentablemente
work.
la
However,
situación en el terreno
unfortunately, the
continúa
situation
siendo
on the
crítica.
ground continues to be critical.
No obstante,
However,
haberse anunciado precisamente un cese al fuego,
a ceasefire
los
has
combates
been
continúan
announced. However, fighting
y
continues.
por lo que debemos continuar
Consequently, we must
todos
continue
nosotros y en especial el Consejo dándole
as
la
the
máxima
Council, and
prioridad
indeed all of us should continue to
al
attach
cese
the
de
utmost
hostilidades.
importance to the cessation of
Solo esto
hostilities. It is
permitiría
only
volver
that
a las
that will make
negociaciones
it possible
para
to
arribar
resume
a
to
una solución
negotiations to
política
ultimately
duradera
achieve
en
a
el marco de los
lasting
procesos
political
de paz de
solution within
Luanda
the
y Nairobi.
framework of the Luanda and Nairobi peace
Con relación a la
processes.
ofensiva del M23,
Regarding
se ha
the
generado una
M23
situación
offensive,
extremadamente
an
crítica
incredibly critical
para las
situation has
poblaciones de la
been
zona,
produced for
al
civilians in
tiempo
the
que se ha
region.
puesto en
At
riesgo
the
la
same
seguridad
time, the
de los
security
contingentes
of
que
MONUSCO
integran la
personnel
MONUSCO.
has been
En ese sentido, se
imperiled.
valora lo
In view of
expresado
that
por el
fact,
secretario
we value
general,
what was said by the
quien ha
Secretary General.
señalado que estos
He
ataques
has
pueden
stated that these
constituir
attacks
crímenes de
may
guerra que deben
constitute
ser
war crimes
investigados
which must be
y cuyos
investigated.
responsables deben
Perpetrators
rendir
must be held accountable.
Ante esta situación,
In the
pedimos su
face of
condena
the
y que el Consejo
aforementioned
de Seguridad
situation,
tome
we
todas las
condemn
la
it,
condena
and
de
we
estas
ask you to do
acciones
the same.
y
The
que el
Security
Consejo de
Council must
Seguridad
take all necessary
tome todas las medidas
measures
necesarias
to
para lograr que la ofensiva del
ensure
M23
that
y
the
aquellos que la
M23
apoyan se detengan
offensive
y
and
se
that waged by
consolide el
those
cese
supporting the
de las
M23
hostilidades
is ceased,
con pleno respeto a la
and
integridad de las
the
fuerzas de
Council
paz.
should act to ensure that there is full
En
cessation
cuanto
of
al desarrollo de la
hostilities
crisis en el terreno,
and
reconocemos
full respect
positivamente
for peacekeeping
las
forces.
orientaciones que el comando
We
de la
value
MONUSCO
the
ha definido
guidelines
para
that the
impulsar la seguridad
MONUSCO
de las
command
poblaciones
has issued
civiles
to
y de los
protect the
contingentes de las
security of
fuerzas de paz
civilians and
ante esta ofensiva.
contingents in the
Sin
peacekeeping
perjuicio de
forces in
ello,
the face of the
expresamos la
M23
necesidad de
offensive.
directivas claras
Without prejudice
para,
to the above, we
para los
express
procedimientos
that
a
there is a
seguir,
need for
así
clear
como el
instructions
máximo
regarding
apoyo a los
procedures to be
contingentes
followed,
nacionales
and
en
utmost
materia
support must be given
logística
to
y de
national
suministros
contingents in
para
terms of
que puedan hacer
logistics and
frente a las
supplies
crisis
so that they're
humanitarias
able to
que
address the
afectan a la
humanitarian
población local
crisis
y las
affecting the local
consecuencias de la entrega de
population, as
armas
well
por las
as
tropas
the consequences of the weapons
congoleñas,
handover by
así
Congolese
como su
troops.
atención médica.
Medical care for
Uruguay
all must be guaranteed.
reitera
We
su
reiterate
compromiso una
our
vez más
commitment
con la paz
once
en la
again
República
to
Democrática
peace
del
in
Congo
the
y su apoyo
DRC
a la
and our
MONUSCO en estos
support for
momentos
MONUSCO
críticos.
at this
Muchas gracias.
critical juncture. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, allow me to express our gratitude to you for convening this urgent meeting to address the escalating situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That we meet again on this issue following the session on Sunday, the 26th of January, underscores the gravity of the unfolding crisis. We welcome the briefing by Deputy Special Representative Vivian van der Peer, and we also recognize the presence of the Foreign Minister of the DRC, Her Excellency Therese Wagner. Mr. President, Zimbabwe, as does SADC, remains unwavering in its adherence to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, particularly the peaceful settlement of disputes and the commitment to respecting the territorial integrity and political independence of states. These principles are more critical than ever as we confront the deepening crisis in the Eastern DRC, particularly in Goma. Mr. President, the chairman of SADC, His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa, issued a statement yesterday in which he conveyed his profound concern over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in the Eastern DRC, brought about by offensive operations of the M23 rebel group and its allies. He condemns unequivocally the cowardly attacks on the UN and SADC peacekeepers, some of whom have paid the ultimate price in the pursuit of peace. On behalf of SADC, President Mnangagwa extended heartfelt condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and wished them, those injured, a speedy and full recovery. Mr. President, the persistent instability in the Eastern DRC, exacerbated by the actions of the M23 rebel group, represents a grave threat to peace and security in the region. The occupation of Goma and other areas by armed groups undermines the sovereignty of the DRC and the stability of the Great Lakes region as a whole. We commend all efforts deployed at the local, regional, and international levels in addressing this crisis. However, we stress that sustainable peace can only be achieved through dialogue, strengthened governance, and robust international support. To this end, we urge the United Nations and the Security Council to, 1, provide enhanced support for the protection of civilians and the stabilization of conflict-affected areas. 2, ensure accountability for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, including the attacks on peacekeepers and civilians. 3, address the root causes of the conflict, including the illicit exploitation of natural resources, which continues to fuel instability. 4, facilitate the movement of humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, as SADC chair, Zimbabwe reaffirms its commitment to collaborating with the African Union, the United Nations, and all stakeholders to achieve lasting peace in the DRC. The current crisis highlights the urgent need to reform the international peace and security architecture, including the UN Security Council, to better respond to the unique challenges facing Africa. Moreover, we reiterate the importance of eliminating the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, which perpetuates instability across the continent. Mr. President, in conclusion, SADC stands in full solidarity with the people and government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We call on all stakeholders to act decisively to prevent further escalation, safeguard lives, and restore peace and stability. This is a moment for collective action, a moment to demonstrate our shared commitment to unity, peace, and sustainable development. Zimbabwe and SADC stand ready to contribute meaningfully to these efforts, and we look forward to working with our partners to forge a peaceful and prosperous future for the DRC, the SADC region, and beyond. To that end, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and current chairperson of SADC has called for an extraordinary summit scheduled for the 30th of January, 2025 to discuss this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
ma délégation se
my
réjouit de
delegation
participer
is
une nouvelle fois à ce
delighted
briefing
to
sur la
participate again in this
détérioration de la
briefing on the
situation
worsening security
sécuritaire en République
situation
démocratique du
in the
Congo,
Democratic Republic of
marquée par
Congo.
les récents
The
développements dans la
situation
ville de
is
Goma.
characterized by recent
Elle
developments
félicite
in the city
la
of Goma.
présidence
We
algérienne du
thank
Conseil
the
pour avoir convoqué
Algerian
cette réunion dans
presidency
un
of the
délai aussi
Council for
court.
having convened this meeting
Je
at
salue la présence de
such
son Excellence
short
Madame la
notice.
ministre des
I
Affaires
welcome Her
étrangères de la
Excellency, the
RDC,
Minister for
son
Foreign
Excellence
Affairs of the
Thérèse
DRC, Her
Kaikwamba
Excellency
Wagner,
Thérèse
et me
Kaikwamba
réjouis du
Wagner,
briefing fait par Madame Viviane
and
Van de
hail the
Per,
briefing delivered by Ms.
représentante
Viviane Van de
spéciale
Per,
adjointe chargée de la
Deputy
protection des
Special
opérations à la
Representative for
MONUSCO.
Protection and Operations in
Avant d'entamer
MONUSCO.
mon propos,
At the
le gouvernement du
outset,
Burundi présente ses condoléances aux soldats
wish, as
qui
the
ont perdu
government of
leur vie
Burundi,
durant les
to
récents affrontements durant les
convey our
48 dernières
condolences
heures.
to the loved ones of those that have lost their
Monsieur le
lives
Président,
over the last 48 hours
pour la deuxième fois,
in the DRC.
en l'espace de
Mr.
48
President, for the
heures,
second time
nous sommes
in
réunis
48
pour
hours,
constater
we are
avec une
gathered
grande amertume
to
que la
note with
situation
bitter
à l'est
regret
de la
that the
RDC
situation
s'est
in eastern
gravement
DRC
dégradée.
has worsened to
Le moment
an
est
alarming
venu pour que
degree.
les paroles
The time has
cèdent
come
la place
for
à des
words
actes
to give way
concrets.
to tangible action.
Comme nous l'avons affirmé il y a
As
2
we
jours,
stated 2
le
days
Burundi
ago,
soutient fermement le respect de la coexistence
staunchly
pacifique entre les
supports the
nations et
principle
rejette
of the
catégoriquement
peaceful
les guerres par
coexistence of
procuration.
nations, and we categorically
Monsieur le
reject
Président,
proxy wars.
depuis
Mr.
près de 3
President,
décennies,
over almost 3
l'Est de la
decades,
RDC
Eastern
est devenu
DRC
le
has
théâtre de
become
massacres
the
insoutenables,
theatre
de
of
conflits
untenable
armés,
massacres,
d'une
a
rare
theatre of
violence alimentée par des intérêts
armed
étrangers
conflicts,
exacerbant les tensions
exceptional in their
locales
violence.
et
These conflicts
sapant
have been
les
fueled by
efforts
foreign
de paix.
interests and
Chaque
undermine
jour, des violations
peace
graves des
efforts
droits
as
humains
well as
sont
fanning the
observées
flames of local
et les
tensions.
victimes
Every day,
se
grave
comptent
violations
désormais
of human rights
en
are
millions.
noted, and the number of victims now
Les
stands
récents
in the
développements à
millions.
Goma témoignent d'un
Recent
potentiel
developments in
embrasement
Goma bear
régional.
witness to a potential
Si aucune
regional
action concrète
conflagration
n'est
if
prise
no tangible
aujourd'hui
action is
pour
taken
condamner
today
les
to condemn
responsables
those
et bloquer leurs
responsible
actions,
and thwart their
nous
plans,
risquons de
we
devenir
risk
les témoins
becoming
d'une
the
catastrophe
witnesses
et
of a
l'histoire nous
disaster,
tiendra
and
directement
history will
responsables.
hold us directly
À ce
accountable.
jour,
To
le
date,
Burundi se félicite
Burundi
des accords
has commended
bilatéraux
bilateral
avec la
agreements
RDC
reached with
en matière de
DRC
coopération
in
militaire
terms
pour la
of
sécurité
military
des frontières
cooperation
communes.
to ensure the security of our
si je puis me
common
permettre
borders.
de placer une petite parenthèse,
Allow me just to issue
le
an
Burundi
aside at
ne
this
fait pas
juncture.
partie d'une
Burundi is
quelconque
not
coalition.
part of any coalition.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
depuis des années,
for years
les
now,
Nations Unies, à
the
travers le
United
travail
Nations, through the
inestimable du
invaluable
groupe d'experts
work
de la
of the
RDC, ont
DRC group of
documenté avec
experts,
précision les
has
dynamiques de ce
rigorously
conflit.
documented the dynamics
Des
of this
rapports
conflict.
multiples ont été
Myriad
présentés dans cette
reports have
salle,
been presented
soulignant
before this chamber,
l'implication
emphasizing
d'acteurs
the involvement of
extérieurs
external
connus
actors
pour soutenir
known to
les groupes armés
support
locaux.
local
Les
armed
violations
groups.
flagrantes des droits de l'homme
We've had
et le
reports of
pillage
flagrant
systématique des
violations of
ressources
human rights and
naturelles
the systematic
de la
pillaging
RDC.
of DRC's natural
Combien de rapports
resources.
supplémentaires
How many more
faut-il
reports do we
avant
need
que la
to
communauté
hear before the
internationale et en
international
particulier le
community, and in
Conseil de
particular
sécurité,
the
prenne ses
Security
responsabilités?
Council, shoulders its responsibilities?
Il y a 48 heures,
48 hours
au cours
ago,
de notre
during
intervention,
our address,
nous nous sommes
we
interrogés sur le
asked
silence
ourselves
assourdissant
questions about the
du Conseil de
deafening
sécurité
silence
alors
of
que
the
des milliers de
Security
vies
Council
sont
at a
tragiquement
time when
perdues chaque
thousands of
jour.
lives are being
Où
tragically
est
lost
la
every
communauté
day. Where is
internationale?
the international
Où est le
community?
Conseil de
Where is
sécurité
the
qui se
Security
montre si
Council, which
actif
is so
dans
ready
d'autres
to
conflits?
act in other conflicts?
Devons-nous interpréter ce
Should we
silence comme une
interpret this
sensibilité
silence
sélective?
as bias?
Comme l'a dit une fois
As
Martin Luther King
Martin
Jr.,
Luther King Jr. once said,
à la fin,
in the end,
nous nous souviendrons
we will
non pas
remember
des mots de nos
not
ennemis,
the words of our
mais des
enemies,
silences
but the
de nos amis.
silence of our friends.
Ne soyons pas les amis
Let us
silencieux.
not be
Soyons
those
du côté de
silent
la Charte
friends.
des
Let
Nations
us
Unies pour
stand
sauver
on the
l'ordre
side of the
institué à
United
San
Nations
Francisco
Charter
en juin
to save the
1945.
order established in San Francisco
Monsieur
in
le Président,
June 1945.
ce conflit dure depuis des décennies et pourtant aucune résolution n'a condamné le Rwanda, auteur de violations flagrantes des principes de la souveraineté nationale et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC. Le Rwanda ne nie même pas sa présence sur le terrain ni son soutien au M23, comme l'ont souligné plus des trois quarts des membres du Conseil lors de la dernière réunion. L'intégrité du territoire de la RDC ne peut être compromise et les incursions armées, les ingérences étrangères, le pillage systématique de ses ressources naturelles et les violations répétées de ses frontières doivent cesser immédiatement. Au regard de la situation sécuritaire humanitaire, le Burundi s'est toujours du côté du plein respect du droit international et du droit international humanitaire. À cet effet, le Burundi condamne les violations flagrantes du droit international et du droit international humanitaire, appelle à une cessation immédiate des hostilités à l'est de la RDC, à garantir que ce territoire ne devienne plus un terrain de confrontation indirecte entre acteurs régionaux et internationaux, soutient les efforts des processus de Luanda et de Nairobi en exigeant le respect des engagements pris par toutes les parties, exige le retrait des forces rwandaises de la RDC et réitère son attachement au respect de la souveraineté de la République démocratique du Congo, son intégrité territoriale, son indépendance politique et son droit à se défendre contre toute agression extérieure. Recommande de poursuivre les soutiens aux populations civiles et déplacées de guerre afin de subvenir à leurs besoins de base avec une attention particulière aux femmes et aux enfants. Pour conclure, et comme nous l'avons déjà exprimé, le Conseil de sécurité devrait être attentif aux revendications légitimes du peuple et du gouvernement congolais. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, thank you for convening a second meeting within just a few days. Remains dangerously fluid as M23 continues its offensive campaign in North and South Kivu. We thank the Deputy Special Representative, Ms. Viviane van der Peer, for her briefing. And again, we wish to recognize the presence of Minister Therese Kayikwamba-Wagner in the chamber. Since the last meeting of the Council on the situation in the Eastern DRC, 4 additional South African peacekeepers lost their lives in the continuing conflict in Goma. On 27th January 2025, M23 launched several mortar bombs aimed at Goma Airport, which landed in the base of the South African troops, killing 3 soldiers and injuring some troops. A 4th soldier, as Minister said earlier, succumbed to his injuries sustained during the weekend attacks. This illustrates that the M23 is well-resourced and would have acquired such resources through means that are against the sanctions imposed by this Council. It is a contradiction in terms that a major UN peacekeeping troop contributing country could provide resources to an illegal armed group that is conducting offensives against peacekeepers, civilians, and key infrastructure, thereby undermining the mandate of this Council. That must be addressed with utmost urgency. As we stated at the last meeting of the Council a few days ago, the future of UN peacekeeping and its credibility is at stake if we are to tolerate such violations without any ramifications. The Security Council must speak with one voice and act in unison to stop the carnage unfolding in the Eastern DRC. Unfortunately, a press statement of the Security Council, while sending an important political message, has proven to be insufficient in the current situation. Consequently, South Africa would like to highlight the following issues. Firstly, the UN needs to, as a matter of urgency, provide additional support to MONUSCO in order to reinforce operational positions. This is to ensure that MONUSCO can fulfill its primary mandate to protect civilians. This support will also assist to ensure that no further peacekeepers' lives are lost. Similarly, a stronger consideration must be made to bolster the support that MONUSCO provides to the South African Development Community Mission in the DRC, SAMI DRC. Both missions, have the primary responsibility of protecting civilians and key civilian infrastructure. They are instrumental as long as armed groups remain active in the Eastern DRC. Secondly, we remain concerned about the worsening humanitarian situation with millions of people in need of humanitarian assistance. There is a need to ensure that appropriate conditions are created for humanitarian aid to reach people in need across Eastern DRC. All parties to the conflict must uphold international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thirdly, we reiterate our call for the resumption of negotiations under the Rwanda process. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa held a telephone call with President Kagame of Rwanda yesterday to discuss recent developments in the Eastern DRC and the escalation in fighting that has resulted in the deaths of many peacekeepers, including South Africans. The two heads of states agreed on the urgent need for a ceasefire and the resumption of the talks by all parties to the conflict. Accordingly, South Africa recognizes the significant strides made by President João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço of Angola in facilitating peaceful resolution of the tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We urge parties to recommit to these talks and address all outstanding issues amicably to allow the region to return to peace and the restoration of the political rapprochement and good neighborliness. This includes both sides addressing their relations with illegal armed groups and the withdrawal of the Rwanda Defense Forces from the DRC. We thus look forward to the much-anticipated East African Community Extraordinary Summit likely to take place in the coming days, with the participation of both President Tshisekedi and President Kagame. Lastly, the Council needs to underline the importance of preventative measures to avoid the recurrence of the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. It is well known that the genesis of this conflict is primarily the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. International and regional efforts, including those initiated by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region to address the problem of the resource curse in the region, must be operationalized and supported. As I conclude, Mr. President, I wish to remind Council members that South Africa has suffered many casualties in this conflict. The reason we never hesitate in supporting peace efforts, even at excessive cost, is because we are a product of international solidarity at whose center was the United Nations. Therefore, the ultimate sacrifice of South African peacekeepers in the promoting peace and security in the Great Lakes region should not be in vain. Our plea is for this Council to always protect those who value, safeguard, and execute the mandates adopted in this chamber, and also hold into account those who violate the decisions of this very council. Failure to do so can only undermine the credibility of and delegitimize the authority of this council and the United Nations as a whole. We trust that all members of this council and the international community can support measures towards establishing a ceasefire, encouraging dialogue, and promoting efforts towards peace and stability in the whole country and the Eastern DRC in particular. Thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Señor presidente del Consejo de Seguridad, miembros de este Consejo, señora ministra de Relaciones Exteriores, Cooperación Internacional y Francofonía de la República Democrática del Congo, Thérèse Kayikwamba Wagner, dada la urgencia de la situación en la República Democrática del Congo y su desarrollo, agradecemos la convocatoria de la reunión urgente del pasado 26 de enero y nuevamente el día de hoy. Agradecemos también la información recibida de la señora Viviane van der Peer, representante especial adjunta para protección y operaciones de la MONUSCO, así como los esfuerzos por mantener informados oportunamente a los países contribuyentes de tropas. Señor presidente, el gobierno de Guatemala desea manifestar su gran preocupación por el agravamiento de las hostilidades en el este de la República Democrática del Congo. Condenamos en los términos más enérgicos la ofensiva lanzada por el Movimiento 23 de marzo de las últimas semanas, su expansión a Kivu del Norte y la toma de la ciudad de Goma. Esta situación tiene un efecto devastador para la población civil, que al momento ha generado el desplazamiento de cerca de 3 millones de personas solo en Kivu del Norte. Como país contribuyente de tropas, Guatemala reitera su apoyo inquebrantable a los esfuerzos de paz en curso, a los procesos de Luanda y Nairobi, dirigidos a reducir las tensiones en la República Democrática del Congo. Lamentamos el fallecimiento de cascos azules de diferentes nacionalidades, incluyendo de Uruguay, Sudáfrica y Malawi, y esperamos la pronta recuperación de los heridos, incluyendo 2 oficiales guatemaltecos. Reafirmamos nuestro apoyo al mandato de la MONUSCO de proteger a los civiles y condenamos enérgicamente las acciones de los grupos armados que pongan en peligro la seguridad de los cascos azules de las Naciones Unidas y el personal civil. Su protección y seguridad inmediata debe ser garantizada, así como la provisión de los suministros necesarios para el desempeño de su misión. Guatemala expresa que los ataques contra cascos azules de Naciones Unidas pueden constituir crímenes de guerra conforme al derecho internacional, en particular teniendo en cuenta que la misión prioritaria cumplida por el contingente nacional es la protección de civiles ante peligro inminente de violencia física, la cual es cumplida de manera efectiva e imparcial. Esperamos que el Consejo de Seguridad tome de manera unívoca y con carácter urgente medidas contundentes condenando los ataques contra los cascos azules que cada vez están más en riesgo. Señor presidente, exhortamos a todos los actores a que respeten la soberanía y la integridad territorial de la República Democrática del Congo y pongan fin a todas las formas de apoyo a los grupos armados, ya sean congoleños o extranjeros. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Monsieur le
President.
Président, le Sénégal
Mr.
voudrait
President,
remercier
Senegal
l'Algérie
would like
pour
to
la
thank
tenue de
Algeria
cette importante
for
réunion
convening this important
et
meeting
saluer l'exposé
and
de
commend
Madame
the
Viviane
briefing
Van
of
de
Ms.
Peer.
Viviane Van de Peer.
Ma délégation se
My
félicite également de la
delegation
présence de
also
Son Excellence
would like
Madame
to
Thérèse Kikwamba
welcome
Wagner,
Her
ministre des Affaires
Excellency
étrangères de la
Thérèse
République
Wagner,
démocratique du
Minister of
Congo.
Foreign Affairs
À
International
l'entente de
Corporation
son
of
intervention,
the DRC.
ma délégation s'incline
From
devant
the
la
outset,
mémoire
my
de tous les
delegation
casques
pays
bleus
tribute to
et
all those
soldats
blue
tombés au
helmets
champ d'honneur.
and soldiers who've
Ainsi, le
died
Sénégal
in the line of
présente
duty.
ses plus sincères
Senegal would
condoléances
like
à
to
l'Afrique du
present
Sud,
its most sincere
au Malawi
condolences to South
et à
Africa,
l'Uruguay en
Malawi, and
particulier.
Uruguay in
Nous
particular.
exprimons notre solidarité
We
agissante
stand in
à la République
solidarity
démocratique du Congo
with
et à l'endroit
the
de
people
tout
of
le
the
personnel
DRC
onusien sur
and
place
all UN
qui
staff
continue
on the ground to
d'apporter
continue to
assistance et
lend
réconfort aux
assistance and
personnes dans le
comfort
besoin,
to
et
people in
ce,
need
à bien
and
des égards,
in
au
many
péril
ways
de leur
at
vie.
risk of their lives.
Aussi, ma délégation
My
a une pensée
delegation
émue pour les victimes
would like to
civiles de
extend
part et
its
d'autre
thoughts
et
and
souhaite
prayers
un prompt
for
rétablissement aux
civilians
blessés,
and
dont
would like
4
to
éléments
wish a
sénégalais de la mission.
speedy recovery for
Mon pays réitère son
those
attachement à la reddition
injured.
des
My
comptes pour tous
delegation
les
would like
crimes
to
commis
reiterate
à
its
l'égard
commitment
du
to
personnel des
accountability
Nations
for all
Unies,
crimes
comme
committed against
recommandé par
UN
la
staff,
résolution
as stipulated in
2589
Resolution
2021.
2589 of
Monsieur le Président,
2021. Mr. President,
comme vous pouvez l'imaginer,
as
le
you can
Sénégal,
imagine,
avec
Senegal,
459
with
éléments
its
à la MONUSCO,
459
est gravement
sons
préoccupé
and
par la
daughters in
situation des
MONUSCO,
casques bleus
is
sur
seriously
place.
concerned by the
En
situation
effet, si au
regarding the
Congo,
blue
en
helmets
1960,
on the ground.
soit 4 mois
In
seulement après son
Congo,
indépendance, que
indeed,
le
in
Sénégal s'était
August
engagé dans l'ONU.
1960, just 4
C'est
months
dire que mon
after
pays
it
est resté
acceded to
activement
its
engagé
independence,
dans les efforts
Senegal
onusiens pour apporter la paix
engaged
dans
in the
cette région
UN
qui n'a connu depuis lors
operation in
que
Congo,
des
so my
faits
country
intermittents.
has remained
En
actively
ces moments
engaged in
graves,
UN efforts to bring peace
nous
to the
rappelons à
region.
toutes les parties étatiques et non
In
étatiques
these
les
difficult
obligations qui
times,
pèsent sur elles
we
pour la
would
protection des civils,
reiterate to
en
all
particulier les femmes
parties
et
the
les enfants,
obligations incumbent
celles des
upon
soldats de
them
la paix et le
to
personnel
protect
humanitaire,
civilians, in
ainsi
particular
que
women and
le
children, and
nécessaire respect
peacekeepers
en
and
toutes
humanitarian
circonstances
staff,
des droits
and also to
humains.
reiterate the
À
necessary
l'instar de
respect for
tous ces
human rights.
préoccupants, le Sénégal
Like the
condamne
previous
avec la plus
speakers,
grande fermeté la
Senegal
reprise des combats
condemns
dans
in
le
the
Nord
strongest
Kivu,
possible
en
terms the
particulier à
resumption
Goma,
of
en
fighting in
violation
North
flagrante
Kivu,
de
and in
l'accord de
particular in Goma,
cessez-le-feu
in
conclu
flagrant
le 30
violation
juillet
of the
2024.
ceasefire concluded on the 30th
L'intensification
of
des
July
affrontements
2024.
constitue une
The
atteinte
uptick
grave à la
in
sécurité de la région
clashes
et du
constitutes a
continent.
serious
Nous ne pouvons laisser
attack
cette
on the
situation
security of the region
dégénérer en
and
une
of the
crise
continent.
globale
We
qui impactera
cannot
des
allow the
centaines de
situation
milliers
to
de vies
deteriorate into a
civiles et dans une
global
région
crisis that will
déjà
have an
plus
impact
qu'éprouvée.
on hundreds
C'est
of
pourquoi ma
thousands
délégation
of civilian
s'associe à
lives and in
l'appel
a
à
region
3+,
that
du
has
Conseil
already
de
been so sorely
sécurité,
tested.
ainsi
This is
qu'à
why
celui
my
du secrétaire
delegation
général
joins itself
exigeant
with the call of the
l'arrêt
A3
immédiat de
plus of the Security
l'offensive du
Council, as well as
M23
that of the Secretary
et de
General,
son
calling
expansion
for the
territoriale.
immediate cessation of the
La seule
M23
solution qui
offensive
vaille dans
and
ce
its
conflit est
territorial
d'ordre
expansion.
politique.
The only
Le
option
Sénégal invite donc les
to this
parties à
conflict
honorer
is
leurs
political in
engagements
nature.
dans le
Senegal
cadre
would
du
urge, therefore, all
cessez-le-feu,
the parties to
à
honour
donner
their
une
commitments
chance
as the
aux
part of the
pourparlers diplomatiques sur
ceasefire
les îles des
and
terres
to give
africains
diplomatic
et à œuvrer
negotiations
de
a
bonne foi
chance under
pour
the
la paix et
auspices
la
of the
stabilité régionale.
African and
Raison pour
in
laquelle
good
mon
faith
pays
to
réaffirme son
strive
soutien
for peace and
indéfectible
regional
aux
stability.
efforts continentaux
My country
de
therefore
médiation
reiterates its
entre la
unfailing
RDC et le
support
Rwanda
for the
actuellement
African
déployés dans le
mediation
cadre
efforts between
du
the
processus de Luanda
DRC and
dirigé par
Rwanda
le
that are
président
currently
de
being
l'Angola.
undertaken as part
Il
of
plaide
the Luanda
également
process.
pour la poursuite des consultations dans le
Senegal
cadre du
also
processus de
calls
Nairobi
for ongoing
pour régler
consultations
la
as part
question
of the
persistante
Nairobi
des groupes
process
armés,
to
y compris
settle
le
the ongoing
M23,
issue
et
of
tracer
armed
la voie
groups,
à suivre pour
including the
instaurer la paix et
M23,
la
and to
stabilité dans la
pave the
région.
way to
Monsieur
bring
le
peace
Président,
and stability to to the region. Mr. President, my delegation does not wish to conclude without calling upon the Council to learn the correct lessons from this conflict and the impact it's having on MONUSCO. What we learn is that there have been many difficulties encountered, but the staff have been very resilient in accomplishing their mission. It is important for the Council to provide this mission with necessary resources to carry out its tasks, to contribute to the protection of civilians in the area where it's deployed, and to support stabilization of institutions in the DRC and the main reforms in the area of governance and security. This necessarily involves the guarantee of an environment propitious for its deployment, the involvement of all stakeholders, and better coordination with regional forces present in the DRC in terms of taking charge of the threat posed by armed groups. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Senegal for the statement. Her Excellency, Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give her the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for the floor. Members of the Council, first of all, I would like to note that for the first time in our meetings, Rwanda did extend condolences for the fallen peacekeepers. However, I would like to rectify something. The peacekeepers did not die in a process. The peacekeepers were killed. Second of all, SADC forces deployment through SAMI DRC were not deployed unilaterally by the DRC, but rather with a mandate from the AU, an organization Rwanda is a part of, even if its behavior in the DRC clearly flaunts its principles. Third, the M23 excluded itself from the Nairobi process by renewing attacks against the FARDC. The government of the DRC has nonetheless expressed its willingness to re-include the M23 in the Nairobi process. We reject Rwanda's obsession and attempts to elevate the M23 to the level of an interlocutor deemed fit to sit at the same table as a legitimate government. 30 years down the line, we have never stooped to the level of expecting and demanding from Rwanda to talk to its brothers and sisters, the FDLR, who are still in our country. We have not stooped to that level. Fourth, on regime change, we will remind the Rwandan delegation that the M23 and the AFC has repeatedly expressed its intent to march in Kinshasa. The very M23 Rwanda forces are backing right now. There is a subtlety that should not go amiss between words and actions. Rwanda's actions, side by side with the M23, are actions seeking to overthrow a legitimately established government. On the Luanda and Nairobi processes, we will remind the Rwandan representative that the DRC never left the negotiating table. It was Rwanda that did not show up on the 15th. It was Rwanda that did not come when President Lorenzo invited us. And President Kenyatta was also present. President Tshisekedi honored his commitment. In the past weeks, we have seen efforts, calls from this council, from our partners, from our friends, urging us all to renew our efforts within the Luanda process. The DRC never left the table. It is up to Rwanda to come back to the table. I would also like to remind the Council that in this very session, the government of the DRC, through my own statement, condemned all attacks against diplomatic missions in the DRC. We do this in our concern to abide by and respect international law. However, we have yet to hear Rwanda explain to us what its efforts have been to abide by international law and to respond to the violations it has been found guilty of in the DRC. Violations of the Charter, violations of international humanitarian law, violations of international human rights law. Members of the Council, I would like to close with what has brought us back here in less than 48 hours. Rwanda's outright contempt for this Council and its declaration that it will not, for the Council and the Council's declaration, and its demonstration that it is in the deluded belief that there is a Rwandan exception when it comes to international law. But what has also brought us here is the Council's choice 2 days ago to opt for words and not for actions. This Council is not unable to take actions. In fact, it is uniquely equipped to take actions. Hence, the question that remains at the end of this meeting is whether this Council is unwilling to act. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kayikwamba Wagner for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.